to Dreamland Encounters. I'm here to share real-life stories about mysterious beings from beyond our skies, perfect for helping you relax and drift off to sleep. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from. It was late March, with that crisp cold that makes your breath visible after sunset. I was 17, in my final year of high school in Kirkcaldy. That Friday night, my friends Yuen, Grant and Lisa were hanging out near the coastal path. We sat on a low stone wall by the dunes, munching chips from the local shop and watching the tide roll in. The time was around 9:30 or 10, with streetlights barely reaching our spot, leaving us mostly in darkness. Something strange happened that night. The first sign was an unnatural silence. Waves were still present, but the constant coastal wind had vanished completely. We'd been joking around when Lisa suddenly pointed toward the water, asking what she was seeing. Initially, I thought she meant a boat's light, but no boat was in sight. 3 distinct lights hovered just above the horizon, evenly spaced and glowing a dull orange like dying embers. They remained perfectly still, neither flickering nor moving. We stood up on the wall for a better view. These lights were positioned far enough out that we couldn't determine if they were over water or in the sky. Yuan tried filming with his phone, but the screen showed only black. He tried again with the flash on, but got the same result. Frustrated, he shoved the phone back in his pocket. We watched these lights for about a minute, trying to make sense of them. No sound, no movement. Suddenly, while we were discussing whether these could be flares or some unknown aircraft, the middle light dropped straight down into the water, or so it appeared. Simultaneously, the other 2 lights blinked out, leaving only dark sea behind. We waited, hoping for something more, but nothing happened. Soon after, the wind rushed back, cold and salty. We decided to keep this to ourselves, agreeing it sounded too weird to share with our parents. The weekend passed normally, and by Monday morning's first period maths class, it seemed like just another unusual night. Something felt strange that day. Mrs. No More. Something felt strange that day. Cowie, our teacher, left the room briefly and returned looking unsettled, telling us to keep reading quietly. Through the window, I spotted 2 men walking down the corridor toward the staff room. They were dressed identically in black suits, crisp and sharp, as if they'd just come from a funeral or court hearing. Pristine white shirts, black ties. One was tall and thin, the other shorter but broader. Later at the lockers, Lisa approached me. "Did you see those guys?" she asked. She had noticed them too. Ewan and Gran joined us, confirming they'd seen the men in the hallway as well. This wasn't normal. Strangers rarely visited our school dressed like this, except perhaps inspectors. But even then, these men looked different. Their faces were pale, hair meticulously parted. They carried no folders or clipboards. During lunch, we overheard a young teacher whispering near the staff room. Her words sent a chill down my spine. They were asking if anyone had been talking about the sky. We hadn't told anyone about the lights. None of us had. When we returned to class, the 2 men were in the hallway again, speaking quietly with Mr. Sturr. By Forbes, our head teacher. He looked uneasy and they weren't smiling. As we passed, they glanced at us. Not casually, but deliberately, as if mentally checking our faces. By the last period, the men had vanished. We asked an office staff member about them, but she claimed not to know, her tone suggesting she didn't want to discuss it further. That night, we gathered at Lisa's place, all unsettled. Their specific question about the sky seemed too targeted. Yuen insisted he hadn't told anyone about the lights, and none of us had posted anything online. We were certain. Over the next week, odd occurrences began to pile up. A black car regularly parked across from the school during lunch breaks. Its engine off, windows up, always the same vehicle. The driver never emerged. When Gran tried getting a closer look, it drove away slowly, not frantically. My phone started behaving strangely too. During a call with Yuan, I heard faint clicking sounds and moments of dead silence. Another time, the screen recording app opened without my interaction. Lisa mentioned her mom had answered the house phone one night and heard only breathing. Something was definitely not right. Not I saw the men again inside the school. But weeks later, walking home after dark, I thought I spotted them across the street near the bus stop. They wore the same suits, stood with the same stance, staring straight ahead. A car passed between us, and when my vision cleared, they had vanished. I wasn't certain if I'd imagined the encounter. The coastal path where we'd seen the lights remained empty afterward. We returned once on a Sunday evening, but none of us could relax. Sounds seemed amplified. The gulls, the wind, the distant traffic. We didn't see any lights and left after just 10 minutes. Even now, when driving that route at night, I find myself scanning the horizon for those mysterious orange glows. Whenever someone at the school mentions inspectors or visitors, I recall those two men in black suits who somehow knew to ask about the sky before anyone had spoken. I had finished lunch and decided to walk up to Arthur's seat. The sky was a pale winter blue, and the city felt quiet and washed out, like the moment after snow melts. Always bring my camera, more out of habit than serious photography, wanting a tangible memory of the day. Halfway up the trail, something caught my attention, bright and hovering just above the eastern slope, completely motionless. Initially, I thought it might be a drone or a weather balloon, but its behavior was different. Perfectly still and symmetrical, it didn't reflect sunlight like the surrounding landscape. I took several photos, carefully focusing to ensure sharp images. The object remained stationary while city sounds faded to a background hum, and an odd stillness seemed to thicken the air. Then, in an instant, it vanished. No gradual fade, no movement, just gone. I continued photographing as I descended, hoping to capture some trace of the object. At home, I examined the images on my computer. There it was in multiple shots, bright and clearly visible above the trees. Each time I zoomed and adjusted the contrast, the image reappeared. I didn't share this experience immediately. The next morning, arriving early at my small independent design studio in the old part of town, something felt different. No, in my small studio, the exposed brick and creaky floors felt familiar. That morning started like any other. I had just booted up my computer when the door opened. Two men entered, sharp in black suits and white shirts. Their shoes gleamed so brightly they caught the morning light, sending reflections across the floor. The taller one spoke first, his voice calm and measured. "Good morning. We need to inspect your camera for errors." I froze. Something felt off. "My camera?" I stammered, unsure. He nodded toward the bag on my desk. "Please," he said, stepping closer with an unnerving silence. The shorter man remained quiet, scanning the office with intense, calculating eyes. They seemed to measure everything. The distance between my desk and window, the monitor angles, the room's entire layout. A strange weight hung in the air, compelling me to comply. Their handling of the camera was methodical but unusual. Whenever I tried to view the screen, they would subtly shift, blocking my view. After a few minutes, they exchanged a knowing glance. "Errors noted," the tall one declared. "That will suffice." Then they were gone. No goodbye, no explanation, no trace on the dusty floor. I went home and immediately checked my photos. The mysterious object had vanished. Images that had clearly shown a bright shape hovering above a slope now displayed only normal clouds and sun. Raw files, different programs, even another computer, nothing. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd imagined the object, but I knew the backup files from the night before had been intact. Now, those two had changed. The folder remained, but the critical frame was altered. I called my photographer friend Mark, hoping for clarity. He suggested a lens flare, but I knew deep down this was something else. In the following weeks, strange details emerged. Black cars with tinted windows parked near the studio, unfamiliar figures lingering just beyond view. Something had changed, and I was determined to understand why. 9 coats at the edge of the street, watching, motionless, then vanishing when I looked directly at them. Rational explanations felt increasingly fragile. The camera incident, the missing object, the silent men in black, all of it made coincidence seem less plausible. One night, I returned to Arthur's seat. I wanted to ground myself, to see the place again. Maybe capture another shot and prove I wasn't imagining things. City lights twinkled below, mist rolling across the hills. My camera was ready, eyes scanning. Nothing appeared, no bright shape, no drone, no flare. But the feeling of being watched returned, subtle yet persistent. Shadows at the edge of my vision seemed exaggerated. Every slight movement in the fog felt like an intrusion. Since then, I've kept my camera close, never unattended at home or in the office. I rarely discuss the incident. There's no way to make sense of it. Sometimes I still check backup files, hoping the object will reappear, that some error might reverse itself. It never does. I can't explain their arrival or why the photos changed, only that they did. The men in black never returned, but I remain vigilant. On clear days, when the wind cuts across the hill and the city stretches below, I wonder if something watches from the mist. It's a quiet dread that doesn't scream but lingers, settling in your chest and making you question the ordinary. I keep climbing the hill. Some things once noticed never truly leave you alone. It happened on a wet Tuesday night in late September. Driving home in my old white transit van, heading south on the A9 near Perth. Fine. Misty rain had been falling steadily all afternoon, the kind that doesn't look significant until it soaks through your jacket. The road was mostly empty, occasional lorries passing. Around 9:30, I glanced at the dash clock. Just past the Luncardy turnoff, I noticed a light in my side mirror. At first, I thought it was a motorbike, a single headlight bouncing in the darkness. But it didn't move like a bike. Too steady, no wobble, no height variation. The glow wasn't the hard white of an LED, but softer, almost pale. Almost Pale, here's a rewritten version focusing on reorganizing the structure. The night was dark and rainy. My van cruised along an empty stretch of road, and something strange started happening. A light appeared behind me, matching my every move precisely. I'd slow down, and it would slow down. Speed up to 70, 75, and it would match me exactly. The speedometer needle sat at 72, becoming my only anchor in a moment that felt increasingly surreal. I knew the speed limit was 60 for vans, but this long, empty road seemed to invite a different rhythm. The pale glow hung persistently in my rearview mirror, never reflecting on the road or the van's body. My hands began sweating. Was this some kind of drone? The thought seemed absurd given the weather and speed. The rain blurred my windscreen, leaving only that floating orb as a clear image. When I needed to overtake a slower car, the light smoothly shifted position, now aligning with my left rear quarter. Just before the Broxton roundabout, it vanished. No fade, no dramatic departure, just gone. I slowed to 50, half expecting its return. Nothing. By the time I reached home in Craigie, I'd rationalized it as a strange vehicle light or reflection. My wife noticed my paleness, but I brushed it off as tiredness. 3 days later, 2 men appeared at my garage. They stood side by side, both in dark suits, white shirts, thin black ties, no mud on their polished shoes, no signs of the morning's drizzle. One tall with a narrow face and slicked back dark hair, the other shorter with nearly invisible pale eyebrows. Both looked to be in their mid-40s. The tall one spoke, his voice flat and emotionless. "Has your speedometer stopped at 72? The question hung in the air, feeling more like a statement than a query. That morning at the garage started weird. 2 people showed up, a tall and short pair who just stood there. When I first saw them, I wasn't sure what was happening. The man repeated something slower, and I remember saying, "What?" His speedometer wasn't stopped at 72. No name, nothing. I laughed nervously. The speedometer worked fine. He tilted his head slightly, bird-like, and asked if I was sure, though it wasn't really a question. His companion didn't speak at all, just stared, with light, unsettling grey eyes that made me want to look away. I tried sounding normal, asking if they needed something fixed. "This is a garage," I explained. They scanned everything slowly, tire racks, oil drums, the floor. The woman finally spoke. "Were you alone?" More a statement than a question. When I said what, she'd already turned to her companion. They exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. Without another word, they walked out. I followed to the door, but by then they were halfway down the lane, walking perfectly in sync toward the street. No car, no umbrella, just walking away. They turned the corner, and when I returned inside, my phone was black, despite being charged. No calls came through that morning, which was unusual for a Friday. I worked on a Fiesta and tried not to think about it. But small things lingered. A warm electronics smell near the shutter, even though my space heater was unplugged. A customer mentioned council workers had been asking about me. Though the council denied sending anyone, driving home, I kept checking mirrors. Just rain and my headlights. 2 weeks passed with only minor oddities. The The van's dash clock randomly 2 hours slow one morning. Battery fine. My wife hadn't reset it. I started locking the van inside the unit. Some nights I thought I saw an old black Jaguar parked near the estate when closing up, but every time I tried getting closer, it would vanish by the time I reached the road. I didn't tell the full story for a while. To inquiries about the strange encounter, I'd say it was probably inspectors or a drone. Just trying to brush off something that felt deeply unsettling. No, I was out by the shed late one night about a month ago, working on my boat engine near Lowick. The sky was clear, wind low. I stepped out with a mug of tea right as midnight approached. That's when I first saw them. Lights, moving in ways no aircraft or satellite should. There were maybe 3 or 4 of these white points, darting across the sky with impossible speed. They'd zip across in less than a second, then stop dead. At one point, they formed a triangle before splitting apart. No sound, no trails, just these strange lights dancing overhead. I stood there, watching, lost track of time. Could have been minutes, could have been 10. I tried to grab my phone, but by the time I returned, the sky was empty. I didn't tell anyone. Not out of fear, really, more because I knew how crazy it would sound. My neighbor Callum would have just laughed it off as local folklore or military exercises. A week later, there was an unusual knock at my door. 3 even taps, a pause, then 2 more. When I opened it, 2 men in plain black suits stood there. No car, no footprints on the wet gravel. They looked completely dry despite the drizzle. The taller one spoke first, voice flat and emotionless. "Have you heard the clicking noise?" No introduction, no pleasantries. I responded, genuinely confused. What clicking noise? Now, that night keeps playing in my mind. They didn't ask if I'd seen anything or been on the road. They spoke as if they already knew. I still drive that route some nights out of habit. The stretch near Ladi feels different now. I keep watching the mirrors, waiting for that pale glow to reappear. It hasn't. And every time my speedometer nears 72, my palms start sweating just like that night. Without thinking, I ease back down to 60. There were 2 men at my door. The taller one spoke first, asking if I had heard something. My stomach dropped. I hadn't told anyone about the lights. Not my wife, who was away working, not a soul. The only other living thing nearby was the neighbor's collie. I claimed I hadn't heard anything. The taller man tilted his head, listening like a bird. "No clicks at all," he said, though it didn't sound like a real question. The shorter man stood silently, staring at me with pale grey eyes that seemed unfocused. His face was completely blank. I asked if they were with the council, wondering if this was about the pasture or the boat. They didn't respond. The taller one scanned my hallway walls before delivering a precise instruction. "If you notice the clicking, note the intervals." As quickly as they'd arrived, they both turned and walked down the gravel drive. By the time I got my boots on and went outside, they were gone. The drive is long and straight, with a clear view to the road. Nothing was there, just drizzle and gulls. That night, lying in bed with everything silent, I first noticed the clicking. Faint taps, like a fingernail against glass, not constant, not regular. I checked everywhere, boiler, fuse box, fridge, but found nothing. Each time I thought it had stopped, it would start again. Sometimes a single sharp tick, sometimes a cluster like an incomprehensible Morse code. I tried recording it, but playback revealed only room noise. For a week, this continued. No men in suits returned, no strange lights appeared, just those soft clicks in the silence. I stopped mentioning it, even to myself. I didn't want to make it real. I started using the radio to mask the sound at night, but when I switched it off to sleep, the clicks returned. Softer, yet still present. One evening, I spotted an old black Jaguar parked down the lane where it meets the main road. No readable plates. When I stepped outside, it rolled away slowly, without lights. The sheep didn't even stir. Night fell, and 2 weeks after my initial encounter, I woke at 3 a.m. to find my kitchen light on, something I never do. The back door was locked, but the bolt sat in an unusual position. Small details were slightly off. My mug had moved from the sink to the table, and my boots were turned outward. The clicking sounds have changed since then. They're less random now, more structured, sometimes 3 quick taps, then a pause, then two exactly matching the knock from that first encounter. I haven't seen the men again, but when I go out to smoke at night, I sense someone watching from the dark edge of the pasture. No movement, no shapes, just a feeling. Earplugs don't help. The clicks are faint, but seen closer, almost inside the room now. I haven't told Callum or anyone else. How could I explain? 3 weeks have passed since they came to the door. No follow-up, no letters, just one haunting question echoing. Have you heard the clicking noise? Because now I have, and once you've heard it, you can't stop noticing. Late October found me camping near Loch Lomond, cold and damp, with fog rolling off the water in thick waves. I'd chosen a small clearing near the northern shore, far enough from the main parking area to feel secluded. My simple plan: set up the tent, start a fire, spend the night reading and listening. By 8 p.m., the fog had thickened. The tree line was almost invisible, the water a flat, dark sheet reflecting nothing. As I leaned back in my folding chair, I noticed the lights. At first, I thought they were fellow campers, two small, bright white dots like headlamps. But they didn't move, they were human-sized, standing upright. The more I watched, the more certain I became. Two men in dark suits, standing perfectly still beyond the water where no path, road, or dock existed. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was a fog-induced illusion, but when I looked again, they remained. The wind pushed the fog, revealing their shapes. Anon, the fog rolled heavy over the water, and my fire crackled lower as hours passed. Two figures stood motionless at the edge of my vision, their bodies rigid and unnatural. I couldn't make out their faces, just dark outlines blending into the misty landscape. At first, I tried to ignore them, telling myself I was imagining things. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. An hour became two, and they remained perfectly still. I'd catch glimpses of them between staring at the fire and pouring water into my kettle. Once, I thought I saw one shift slightly, but it might have been a trick of the thick fog. Something stopped me from calling out. It felt like breaking an unspoken rule. This wasn't traditional fear, but a strange awareness that my presence mattered in ways I couldn't comprehend. Around 3 a.m, the fog was so dense I could barely see the shoreline. When I finally grabbed my flashlight and swept its beam across the landscape, the men were gone. Not hidden, completely absent. No trace remained where they had stood. I searched the trees, finding nothing. The water lay flat and empty. Then I heard it. Leaves crunching softly, steadily. From the tree line, two figures emerged where no path existed. They walked deliberately, moving upright toward a distant point before vanishing behind another line of trees. Their black silhouettes blended seamlessly with the night fog. At dawn, when the mist lifted, I inspected the ground. Impossibly, there were no footprints, no crushed grass, not even a broken twig. The clearing looked untouched. I packed my gear slowly, half expecting them to reappear. Driving back to my flat in Glasgow, I continuously checked the rearview mirror. The A82 stretched empty behind me. By the time I reached the city, the entire experience felt like a dream, something I was meant to forget, yet couldn't. The farm has been in my family since my grandfather's time. A stone farmhouse, a few fields, and a barn sitting about 15 miles outside Annecy. It was late October, with those damp nights, where the air feels heavy and stars look smeared behind a misty film. Around midnight, I went out to check the north field because the sheep had been restless earlier. That's when I saw it. A glow hovering just above the tree line at the far end of the field. At first, I thought it might be a helicopter or a searchlight from some town event, but there was no sound, not even the distant hum you'd expect from a rotor or engine. It wasn't a beam of light either. The glow seemed contained, like part of a solid shape, yet the shape itself was hard to pin down. I've tried to rationalize what happened, thinking maybe it was another camper, a prank, or a trick of fog and imagination, but the way they appeared and disappeared, the fact that no path or boat could have brought them here, it doesn't make sense. I don't know what they were doing or why they were watching me, but I do know one thing: whatever it was, they had been waiting, and I had somehow stumbled into their observation. I tried talking to friends about it, but most dismissed it as other campers or fog playing tricks. But I know what I saw. I camp often, usually alone, and I've never seen anyone appear or disappear like that. Weeks later, I returned to the spot in daylight, retracing my route to the clearing. The shoreline was empty, the trees were the same. There was nothing to suggest anyone had been here at all. I never saw the figures again. I haven't seen anyone in a black suit since, and I haven't returned to that campsite at night. But sometimes, driving along the A82 after work, when the light hits the water in a certain way, I catch a shadow or a flicker in the corner of my eye, and I swear I see them standing at the edge of the loch, still watching. I tell the story only now because it's been years, and it stayed with me, tucked into the back of my mind where I can't quite reach it. Some nights, I still picture them out there, black shapes in the fog, patient and motionless, waiting for someone else to notice. Even writing this, I check the windows, half expecting to see them on the far shore, standing silently, staring back. Mind oval one moment, triangular the next. The strange light shifted depending on how I moved my head. Standing at the fence, my breath visible in the cold air, I listened. Silence hung heavy. The sheep, usually skittish, were now pressed together near the barn, unnaturally still. A weird pressure pulsed in my ears, similar to the sensation before diving underwater. After about 30 seconds, the glow dimmed, drifting slowly westward before blinking out completely. I scanned the dark sky for another 20 minutes, but nothing returned. Back inside, I made a quick note in the kitchen about the time and direction of the light. The next morning, around 7, I stepped outside to feed the animals. Highland fog clung low to the ground like wet cloth. At the far edge of my property, just past the stone wall overlooking the north field, 2 men in black suits stood motionless. They weren't talking or moving, just staring straight up at the sky. Something felt distinctly off about them. Their suits were strange enough in this damp hillside setting, but their absolute stillness was even more unnerving. No shift in weight, no adjusting feet, no visible breath clouds. They were like statues. My gut warned me not to call out. While preparing feed buckets, I kept glancing back. They remained perfectly still. Their faces were hard to discern, but I glimpsed pale skin, dark hair, possibly sunglasses, though the sun hadn't fully risen. I tried to ignore them and continue my chores, but each time I looked up, they were still there, watching the sky. About 10 minutes passed. At one point, I turned my back completely to enter the barn for another feed sack. When I returned just 30 seconds later, they were gone. No car, no footprints on the damp grass, just an empty hillside and rolling fog. Walking to their previous spot, my heart racing, I saw the grass was flattened where they'd stood. I scanned the fields, the lane, even the small road running parallel to my land. Nothing. The sheep, which had been restless while I was in the barn, had moved to the opposite end of the field. I kept checking that spot throughout the day. The north field seemed off, and my dog Bear's behavior confirmed something was strange. Normally fearless, he stood at the barn door with his tail down, refusing to cross the fence line, even when I called him. That night, when the mist rolled back and the stars came out, I felt a soft, rhythmic pressure in my ears, like being underwater. Nothing moved in the sky. The sheep huddled tightly by the barn, and I watched through the window, lights off, scanning the property's edge for any movement. For 3 more mornings, I checked the field at dawn. No men in suits appeared, no mysterious glow above the trees, but the sheep remained reluctant to graze in the north field. They'd take a few steps in, then back away, clustering together as if an invisible barrier prevented them from moving forward. By week's end, I stopped trying to force them. I fenced off the area and left it empty. Standing at its edge felt different. The air seemed heavier, with a quiet pressure almost tangible against my skin. I never saw those men again. I still don't understand how they arrived or where they went. I've had strangers pass through before, lost hikers, surveyors, kids on bikes, but nothing like this. Nothing like 2 silent men in black suits staring at the sky in the mist. Nothing that leaves an entire field feeling so fundamentally wrong. Now, whenever I step outside at night, I find myself glancing at that tree line, half expecting the glow to return, or those 2 figures to reappear, their attention fixed on something beyond my comprehension. It was late November, a cold, damp night, with the faint scents of wet tarmac and chimney smoke. Claire, my girlfriend at the time, had just moved into a small terrace house near Dundee's outskirts. We'd spent the evening unpacking boxes, finishing well after midnight. Her street was a short residential road ending abruptly. Old brick houses lined narrow pavements, with a single orange street light marking the corner. When we stepped outside for some air, an unusual silence enveloped us. No distant cars, No barking dogs, just stillness. Claire lit a cigarette and motioned for me to look up. Over the rooftops, not far above, a triangular shape hung in the sky. We stood completely still, not a sound between us. A strange object hung in the night sky, marked by 3 points of white light with a faint red glow in the center. It wasn't massive, but close enough that we could make out its darker edges against the sky. The thing just hung there, completely motionless. We whispered to each other, not really understanding why we were being so quiet. Claire tried to capture it on her phone, but the screen stayed black, refusing to record anything. After 2 attempts, she gave up. We watched as the red center pulsed once, and then the corner lights blinked in sequence. 1, 2, 3, like stage running lights. It repeated twice before everything went completely dark. There was no movement when it disappeared. No sudden speed, no upward climb. It simply wasn't there anymore. We stood shivering, staring at the empty sky until Claire finally said, "Let's go inside." That night, neither of us slept well. We didn't tell anyone, not our neighbors, not our families. We barely discussed it between ourselves after that first night. A week later, we were at the bus stop on the high street. It was early evening, around 6, already dark and drizzling. The pavement was slick under the streetlights, and the stop was empty except for us. That's when the man approached. He came from the opposite direction of the main road, hands in the pockets of a black overcoat. Underneath you could see a black suit, white shirt, and black tie. Despite the cold, he wore no hat or gloves. His hair was neatly parted, and he was clean-shaven. Without greeting or asking the time, he stopped a few feet away and looked directly at us. First at Claire, then at me. He asked very clearly, "Did the lights blink in sequence?" It took me a moment to process his question. Claire started to respond, but before she could, he turned and walked away. Not quickly or nervously, just a calm stroll back the way he'd come, his shoes clicking on the wet pavement. He never looked back. We sat frozen. The bus came and went without us. When we finally spoke, Claire's only words were, "How did he know?" After that, strange things started happening. One evening, leaving Claire's place, I spotted a black car parked at the end of her street. Its engine was off, windows tinted. The driver's silhouette was barely visible. When I walked toward it, the car started and rolled away slowly, not speeding, just moving off as if it had been waiting. Claire said her landline rang twice late at night that week, but when she picked up, nobody was there. A faint clicking sound, like an old tape recorder, seemed to be on the other end. One night, I woke up on her sofa and noticed a bright white light through the curtains. No engine sound accompanied it. By the time I pulled back the curtain, the street was empty. We never saw the triangular craft again, nor did we see the man directly. Weeks later, standing at the same bus stop, I spotted a tall figure at the street's far end. He was under a lamp, wearing a black coat, hands in his pockets, completely motionless. When a bus passed and brought my view for a second, he vanished. I tried reasoning it out. Maybe it was a new type of drone. Maybe the man had overheard us talking, but nothing added up. We'd been completely alone when we saw the craft. We hadn't told a soul. The only people who knew were me and Claire, and she swore she hadn't mentioned it to anyone. By January, Claire moved closer to the city centre. The car stopped showing up. The phone calls stopped too. We never got an explanation. Now, whenever I wait for a bus at night, I catch myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting a man in a black suit to ask me a question I won't know how to answer. It happened just after midnight when I was driving home from a friend's place near Stirling. The roads were quiet and slick from a thin mist settled over the hills. My headlights cut through the fog in long, narrow beams as I carefully watched the road's bends, still thinking about swerving around a deer the week before. On a long stretch between the village and city outskirts, I saw something. At first I thought it was a shadow, maybe a fallen branch or debris. Then it moved, crossing the road slowly and deliberately, completely silent. A black shape low to the ground with edges that didn't reflect my headlights, like a normal object would. I slammed the brakes instinctively, heart pounding. It didn't move like an animal. Instead, it glided smoothly across the road and disappeared into the mist. I sat, gripping the wheel, convinced I must have imagined it, that my eyes were playing tricks. I told no one, not friends, not my partner. Who would believe me? I continued driving home slowly, glancing repeatedly into the rear-view mirror. The mist hung low on the streets as an unsettling feeling of being watched consumed me. A few nights after that initial moment, I sat in my flat attempting to distract myself with a late dinner, the radiator humming softly in the background. A deliberate slow knock interrupted my meal. Most people who visited at this hour either called ahead or didn't knock at all. When I opened the door, two men stood before me, dressed identically in black suits, white shirts, black ties, and shoes that gleamed in the hallway light. Their faces were blank, pale in the porch's glow. "Good evening," one said evenly. "Is your vehicle still functioning?" The question struck me as bizarre. My car worked fine as far as I knew, yet something in his tone suggested he already knew something I didn't. "Yes," I managed, my voice higher than usual. They nodded slightly, offering no further explanation. The shorter man studied me from head to toe, not threateningly, not friendly, just observing. Before I could ask what they meant, they turned and walked down the stairs, vanishing into the fog. No car started, no footsteps faded, they were simply gone. In the following nights, strange occurrences became routine. Street lights flickered at odd intervals. Shadows that matched no visible object danced at my periphery. I'd hear a distant car engine start, only to find nothing on the road. Dark figures seemed to move behind the mist at the street's edge, disappearing when I approached. My unease wasn't pure terror, but a low vibration that burrowed deep into my chest. This weirdness extended beyond my flat. During my commute, I repeatedly noticed unusual black cars, older sedans with heavily tinted windows, always parked in strange locations, always seemingly empty. I started checking locks and windows multiple times each night, the sensation of being watched growing increasingly oppressive. Something was definitely not right, though I couldn't explain exactly what. Here's the rewritten text. Late autumn had settled in, with radiators clicking and hissing in my flat. The cold wasn't quite winter yet. A few days earlier, I'd been on local radio during a casual call-in segment about strange sky sightings. Graham, the host, was discussing odd encounters, and I decided to share my experience. 2 weeks before that call, I was walking home from the pub, cutting across the park near the canal. Something caught my eye, a line of lights, hanging low, moving slowly. Not like a plane, I know planes, and this was different. Too quiet, too close, with lights that didn't match any aircraft I'd seen. Since then, things started feeling off. I began logging strange occurrences on my phone, trying to track these unusual moments. Sometimes I'd scroll back and find entries I didn't remember writing, notes in my own handwriting, describing times and places I wasn't sure I'd been. I wondered if I was sleepwalking or dozing off while driving. Nothing bad had happened. No accidents, no bruises. Just a growing sense of disorientation. One foggy grocery run changed everything. The mist was heavier than usual, clinging to the road. Suddenly, I saw that same low black shape cross in front of my car, moving silently between fog and headlights like it belonged to another world. I slammed the brakes. It vanished. No sound, no trace, as if it had never existed. That night, sleep was impossible. I stared at my car in the driveway, barely visible in the dim streetlight. I imagined someone watching, checking if it still worked. Every creak, every gust of wind felt like a warning. Eventually, I tried to return to normal. I drove less at night, avoided certain roads, kept windows closed. The men in black never returned. No knocking, no watching. The black shape disappeared, at least from my view, but the memory lingers. Late at night, looking at the driveway or watching mist roll over hills, I feel that same weight, like someone is checking if everything is still in order. And part of me knows that when they asked about my vehicle, it was never really about the car at all. Here's a rewritten version. Late one night, a stranger showed up at my door. He was tall, probably around 6'2" inches, wearing a pressed black suit with a white shirt buttoned all the way up. No tie. His appearance was striking. Pale skin, narrow face, dark hair combed flat. He looked to be in his early 40s, though something about him was hard to pinpoint. What really caught my attention were his eyes. Not their color, but how he stared, unblinking and fixed, as if he hadn't quite mastered the art of eye contact. "Mr. Harker," he said. That was my name. So I nodded. He didn't introduce himself or offer a handshake. Instead, he walked into my living room with calculated steps, pausing to scan my surroundings. His gaze swept over my bookshelf, a half-empty water glass, and a stack of unopened mail. Then he turned to me and spoke with unsettling calmness. "You described lights in the sky. I want to know about the sound patterns you noticed." This caught me off guard. I hadn't mentioned any sounds to anyone, not even on the radio, when I'd initially described the incident to Graham. The whole thing had been eerily silent. I told him exactly that. No hum, no vibration, nothing. He tilted his head slightly, as if he didn't quite believe me. His words were slow and deliberate, seemingly rehearsed. Again, I insisted, just lights, nothing more. He stared at me for what felt like an eternity before sitting in my armchair without invitation, moving with a strange, stiff precision. It all started 3 nights earlier. I'd seen something unusual, 6 or 7 white spheres glowing and shifting, seemingly connected by an invisible thread. They hung in the sky for maybe half a minute before tilting and sliding behind the clouds. No sound, no trail, just gone. When I told Graham about it on the radio, it was a short, unremarkable description. He joked that I needed another pint, as usual. And that was supposed to be the end of it. No, people were sitting around, but they hadn't practiced much. He folded his hands on his knees and began asking me about the exact arrangement of the lights. I tried to describe it as best I could, but he kept interrupting with specific questions about how the lights worked. He asked if they pulsed in sequence, if they overlapped, or if their brightness shifted in cycles. Those were his exact words, pulses and cycles. An uneasiness started to creep over me. While he wasn't threatening, something about his intense focus on minute details made me nervous. He wasn't taking any notes, no notebook, no phone, nothing. Just sitting there, staring and asking questions. At one point, he asked if I'd experienced any unusual dreams since the sighting. That caught me off guard. I said no, but then admitted I'd been waking up suddenly in the middle of the night. I'd sit upright in bed, heart racing, with no memory of what I'd been dreaming. I didn't share that last part with him. After about 20 minutes, he stood up abruptly. No goodbye, no thank you. He simply said, "If you notice the sounds, you will know what they mean." Then he walked to the door, opened it himself, and stepped into the hallway. I followed more out of curiosity than anything else. He went down the stairs slowly, almost mechanically. Leaning over the railing, I expected to hear the front door open when he reached the bottom. But there was nothing. No creak of hinges, no slam, just silence. I waited a full minute, then went down after him. The entryway was empty. Outside, the street was quiet, with just one car parked under the lamp. No sign of him walking away. That night, sleep eluded me. I kept replaying our conversation, especially that line about sound patterns. It felt like he knew something I didn't. The more I thought about it, the more I wondered if there had been a sound that night in the park. Something too faint for me to register. Or maybe he was deliberately planting the idea in my mind. A week later, the strangest thing happened. While brushing my teeth with the bathroom window cracked open, I heard a low, steady hum. At first I thought it was the boiler or distant traffic, but it wasn't. The sound was deeper, more even, almost like standing next to an electric transformer, except it was coming from outside. I turned off the tap and stood listening. The hum continued for about a minute, then faded completely. I rushed to the window and looked down at the street. Nothing unusual. Just the same cars, the same empty pavement. I never saw the man again. Never saw the man again. Cuthbert's, a small regional hospital outside Manchester. Unusual cases were rare. Our facility typically dealt with older patients experiencing falls or respiratory issues. About 6 years ago, one particular night stood out. Around 1:30 in the morning, paramedics brought in Alan Webster, a man from a village 15 miles north, late 30s, wiry, with muddy boots and a jacket smelling of wood smoke. He had collapsed in a field after calling emergency services himself while walking his dog. His vitals were stable, but Alan was visibly distressed. He kept repeating, "I was right above me. I couldn't move." The lights were everywhere. The paramedic seemed dismissive, rolling his eyes and muttering about late-night television. Despite his state, we admitted him for overnight observation. As I settled him in, Alan repeatedly tried sitting up, constantly looking toward the window as if expecting something to still be there. His dog had run off and hadn't returned. When I asked about his experience, he described a silent disk of light circling over the tree line, no sound at all. He emphasized, "That's the worst of it." His speech was slurred, suggesting he was recovering from a faint. Alan claimed he'd blacked out when something moved overhead, and upon regaining consciousness, temporarily lost sensation in his hands. I documented everything professionally, though part of me attributed his account to stress or dehydration. Around 3 a.m., while completing charts at the nurse's station, 2 men entered the ward through the main doors. This immediately struck me as odd, since we locked down everything at that hour, and visitors must buzz the front desk downstairs. Both wore standard black suits with white shirts and black ties, polished shoes. One was shorter, bald with pale skin, the other taller, dark-haired, appearing to be in his early 40s. What unsettled me most was their synchronized, purposeful movement. No wasted motion, walking directly to the desk. The shorter man asked in a flat tone, "Where is Mr. Pear? Where is Mr. Pear?" Alan Webster. Bow. Hospitals can be strange places, especially late at night. There was something unsettling about the 2 men who showed up at my desk, both staring intently, and they claimed to be from administration. Their appearance and behavior felt off. The taller man's voice was calm, but his accent suggested he wasn't local or even clearly British, almost like he had learned the words phonetically. I told them visiting hours were over, but the shorter man leaned closer, his fingernails oddly smooth like plastic. "We need to speak with Mr. Stouter." "Webster now," he said, in a way that made my stomach twist. Against my better judgment, I gave them his room number, but insisted I'd check with the charge nurse before letting them in. They didn't wait. Walking past me down the hall, their shoes clicked in unison. I followed, trying to understand what was happening. By the time I reached Alan's room, the door was already shut. Through the glass panel, I saw them standing on either side of his bed. Alan was wide awake, his eyes darting between the 2 men. His mouth moved rapidly, though I couldn't hear the words. One man held a small notepad but wasn't writing anything. I tapped on the door, but no one turned. For a split second, Alan looked at me, and he was terrified. Then the taller man leaned in and said something, and Alan's face went blank. They stayed about 10 minutes. When they left, I stepped forward to ask for identification. "He has been discharged," the taller man said directly. "No paperwork, no consultation, just those words." I rushed into the room. Alan's bed was empty. The sheets were pulled back, but he was nowhere, not in the bathroom, not in the hallway. His clothes and boots were gone too. I tried to chase after the men, but the corridor was completely empty. I ran to the stairwell and lobby, but found nothing. Security insisted no one had come through the front doors in the last half hour. Things only got stranger by morning. Alan's admission record had vanished from the system. No file, no wristband, nothing. When I inquired, they claimed the patient number I provided didn't exist. The paramedics who had brought him in denied ever transporting anyone by that name. I checked the incident book myself and confirmed my 1:45 a.m. entry for Alan Webster. But now, it was as if he had never existed. Alan Webster had vanished from the hospital ward without a trace. No one seemed to remember him clearly. I spoke with other nurses, but most dismissed my questions. Only Claire, a night aide, revealed something strange. She witnessed 2 men escorting Alan from his room. He walked unsteadily between them, almost like someone sleepwalking. When we checked the ward CCTV footage, a 15-minute gap existed exactly during that time. No discharge papers were filed. No doctor signed off. Officially, Alan Webster was never even admitted. Weeks after his disappearance, odd occurrences began haunting me. The stairwell light would flicker only when I was alone. Automatic doors at the front would unexpectedly open around 3 o'clock or 4 a.m. once. Leaving my shift near dawn, I spotted a black sedan with tinted windows idling across the street. The moment I turned to look directly at it, it slowly drove away without headlights. I never saw Alan again. Late one August evening on Low Rannoch, after sunset, I was fishing as usual. The water was black, with small ripples catching the last hints of daylight. I'd fished this area for years, hoping for a trout or 2 for dinner. Something unusual caught my attention. The water began moving strangely, not from wind or fish, but something deeper. A soft glow appeared beneath the surface. shifting slowly as if following a hidden pattern. But nothing was out there. The glow moved in almost perfect arcs, sometimes disappearing, sometimes reappearing a few feet away. I watched longer than intended, trying to rationalize what I was seeing. Eventually I packed up, shaking my head. I told no one. I didn't write it down or even mention it to my occasional fishing companion. It was one of those experiences you file away, unsure if it even happened. The next morning, while cleaning my nets at the dock, I noticed a distinctive black car parked at the far end. A black sedan, old and weathered like something from the 90s, sat parked with tinted windows that seemed darker than usual. Two men in crisp black suits and gleaming shoes stepped out, walking directly toward me with an unsettling precision. The tall one spoke first, his voice calm and flat. "How many times have you seen the movement?" I blinked, uncertain what he meant. Movement? I hadn't told anyone about what I'd seen the previous night. Not neighbors, not friends, not anyone. These strangers seemed to know something they shouldn't. When I claimed I didn't understand, the shorter man stepped closer, his ash-grey eyes fixed on me steadily. "You know the pattern, the light," he said. Something in his gaze made me uncomfortable. I finally admitted I'd seen it only once, and even speaking those words felt wrong. A quick glance passed between them, so fast I almost missed it. Something unreadable flickered in that exchange. Confusion, disbelief, or something else entirely. They turned and walked back to their car with an unnatural gait that didn't seem quite human. Neither fully opened their door before sitting, and the car started without a sound, sliding into the gravel like morning mist. Then it was gone, as if it had never existed. I tried to shake off the encounter, telling myself I'd imagined it, but later something unsettled me. When I checked the dock, there were no footprints. The gravel remained undisturbed, with no trace of tire tracks. It was pristine, as if nothing had happened. That evening, I returned to the dock. The water's surface was smooth and black, silent. Yet I felt watched, like I wasn't supposed to be there. I packed up early and walked back to my small cabin, scanning the tree line constantly. I saw no one but kept looking, half expecting to catch a glimpse of a suit or a watch reflection. For nights afterwards, shadows near the dock's edge haunted my peripheral vision. Late September, about 10 years back, I was living in a small village outside Inverry in Aberdeen. Picture this quiet place surrounded by farmland, barely 2 shops and a pub to speak of. Nights were darker then, no street lights beyond the main road, and on clear nights, stars stretched uninterrupted across the sky. One night, just after 11, I was walking home from a friend's house. The air carried that early autumn sharpness, and fields were heavy with cut silage. My torch illuminated the dirt path, helping me avoid tripping on ruts. When I finally looked up, something caught my eye above the tree line. A shape was blocking out part of the stars. At first I thought it was a cloud, but it was too precise. 3 straight edges forming a perfect triangle. I stopped walking, completely still. It moved slowly, silently, gliding without a sound. No engine noise, no branch rustling like a low-flying plane might cause. 3 white lights, steady and unblinking, outlined its edges. It passed directly overhead in maybe 20 seconds, then continued toward the hills, blending back into darkness. I didn't run home, but I felt frozen, my body unsure how to react. Something about those 2 men who asked questions stayed with me. They were precise, methodical, checking a record I didn't know existed. The way they looked at each other after I spoke once, it was strange. They vanished like they were never real. Now, when the wind is right and the loch is dark, I sometimes imagine them walking up the hill toward my cabin again. Part of me wants answers, but another part knows I'd rather not find out. So I watched from the hill's edge, letting memory sit quietly like the water's surface, a place I'll never fish near again. They were outside my window, but every time I stepped out, they'd disappear. No car, no people, nothing. The loch seemed different somehow, quieter, heavier, like it was holding its breath. I haven't returned to that part of the loch since. I still fish the area, just not there, not at that dock. And I've never told anyone what happened. There's no proof, just the memory of 2 men who knew something I never said. Night after night, I kept the encounter to myself, not even telling my wife. What I'd witnessed seemed impossible, a strange movement in the sky that defied any aircraft I'd ever seen. Sleep became a restless replay of those moments. The next morning was bright, with damp streets washed clean by recent rain. Walking to the shop, I was halfway down the lane near the old church when a man appeared from around the corner. His appearance was striking: a black suit, white shirt, thin black tie. In our small village, such formal attire was rare outside of Sunday service or funerals. He stopped directly in my path, his presence unsettling. His pale skin and dark eyes held an unnatural stillness. No twitching, no blinking, just a frozen, intense gaze. Then he spoke, his voice calm but strange. Did the craft rotate? The question caught me off guard. How did he know? I hadn't told anyone about what I'd seen, hadn't even fully processed it myself. When I asked him to clarify, he repeated the exact same words. Almost reflexively, I responded that the object had simply glided flat. The moment the words left my mouth, I realized I'd revealed more than I intended. He nodded, as if confirming something, then walked away down the narrow street by the church. Something compelled me to follow. But when I turned the corner, the lane was completely empty. I walked to the end, emerging into an open field with no possible hiding spots, no gates, no vehicles. Nothing explained his sudden disappearance. In the following days, odd occurrences began to unsettle me. My typically calm dog barked repeatedly at the garden gate, always just before 2 a.m. Once, I thought I glimpsed a dark car idling at the field's edge, its lights extinguished. The phrase, "Did the craft rotate?" echoed in my mind, a persistent reminder that something unexplained had happened. My memory haunts me. That night at Loch 80 was unlike anything I've experienced before. Laura and I had planned a weekend camping trip, eager to test out her new gear before autumn arrived. Late August brought warm days, but chilly nights that demanded a good sleeping bag. We discovered a perfect campsite off a forestry track on the north side. A flat piece of ground overlooked the loch, with the farmhouse's faint lights barely visible in the distance. The silence was profound. Every water ripple and branch movement seemed amplified. After dinner, we sat by the water's edge, quiet and listening. Around 11, when darkness had fully settled, Laura spotted something unusual. What started as a potential star reflection transformed into something extraordinary. A pale yellow sphere, lantern-sized, hovered about 100 feet above the water's surface. Gradually, 2 more appeared, maintaining precise distances from each other. These weren't typical aircraft lights. They glowed steadily with a strange, pulsing quality that made the water beneath shimmer. Moving silently across the loch, they performed an inexplicable dance. At one point they lowered closer, creating mirror images, 3 spheres above, 3 reflecting below. After approximately 15 minutes, they rose higher and vanished without trace or sound. We returned to the tent, mostly silent. I remember lying awake, listening intently for any unusual sounds. Nothing came, just occasional fish splashes and wind through heather. The next morning, while unzipping the tent, I noticed 2 men standing nearby. They wore dark suits, black ties, and crisp white shirts, clothing that seemed bizarrely out of place in our remote wilderness setting. Their attire was neat and uncreased, as if they'd materialized from nowhere. Weeks later, a strange man approached me, asking peculiar questions about rotation. He seemed intensely interested in some specific detail. Then, just as suddenly, he disappeared. No one in the village ever mentioned seeing him, and I never saw him again. To this day, I can't explain what happened that night. The memory of those light spheres and those oddly dressed men remains vivid and unexplained. We were heading home after dinner at her sister's place in Oak Ridge, traveling along dark back roads with trees and occasional pastures. It was early October, with a cool crispness in the air and an unusually clear sky. About halfway home, near some farmland, Marissa spotted something first. Hovering low above a row of trees, a couple 100 yards off the road, was a cluster of lights. Initially, I thought it was a plane, but the pattern was odd. These weren't blinking aircraft lights. They glowed steadily, 3 white and 1 red, arranged in a diamond shape. What struck me most was how unnaturally still they were. We slowed down and stopped on the shoulder to get a better look. The object hung silently in place. It wasn't like a helicopter, no rotor sound, no vibration in the air. Slowly, the light seemed to rotate and then drift sideways, parallel to the road. Days later, we encountered something equally strange. Two men appeared without warning or introduction. One was tall with very short, dark hair. The other had lighter hair. They asked us repeatedly if we'd heard a hum. We hadn't told anyone about any sound, and at that moment we hadn't heard anything. They exchanged a quick glance, as if confirming something silently. Then they simply said, "Thank you," and walked back up the forestry track. When I finally went to follow, the track was empty. No car sounds, no footprints in the soft mud. Later that day, Laura noticed the sheep in the nearby field were huddled tightly against the fence, as if trying to distance themselves from something. Driving home, we found ourselves unable to discuss the encounter openly, feeling that speaking about it might somehow make it worse. One detail haunted me: how absolutely certain those men had been that we'd heard a hum. We never camped at that site again. We watched it for maybe 2 minutes, this thing by the tree line, just sitting there until it suddenly rose up fast, unnaturally fast, and disappeared into the sky without a sound. We drove home in a weird silence afterward, both of us glancing out the windows like we expected it to come back. My mind kept replaying the moment, trying to make it fit into something ordinary, but it just didn't. Our house should have been comforting when we turned onto our street, but the headlights revealed 2 men standing at our door. They were tall and thin, dressed in dark suits, with skin so pale it looked almost grey in the light. They didn't turn to look at our car, which immediately felt wrong. Most people would. Instead, they stood motionless, facing the front door like they'd been waiting. Marissa grabbed my arm. "Who are they?" she whispered. I pulled into the driveway slower than usual, my brain struggling to process what was happening. We hadn't told anyone about what we'd seen. We hadn't even discussed it with each other. Yet here were these 2 men, already waiting at our house. Before we could get out of the car, both men turned in perfect unison and started walking toward us. Their movements were stiff but deliberate, like an awkward imitation of human walking. I rolled the window down halfway as they approached. One leaned toward the window, his eyes impossibly dark, his expression unchanging. "Did you see it land?" he asked in a flat, mechanical voice. That was all. Marissa and I just stared. My heart raced. The way he phrased the question made my stomach twist, as if they already knew exactly what we had witnessed. "No," Marissa finally answered quietly. The man stared at her, then straightened up. He glanced at his companion, who remained silent and still. Without another word, they turned and walked down the driveway, not hurried, not slow, just steady, like following a predetermined path. I thought they might have a car parked on the street, but when they reached the end of the drive, they didn't cross the road or head toward any vehicle. They just kept walking side by side until the darkness swallowed them past the streetlight. We sat in the car for a long time, stunned into silence. The house felt different when we finally stepped outside. Empty, yet something lingered. The yard seemed quiet, but the silence felt heavy. Sleep was impossible that night. Every tiny noise outside made us alert, listening intently. Around 3 a.m., I got up and double-checked all the locks. Everything was in place, but the atmosphere felt strange, as if we weren't alone. The next morning, I questioned our neighbors. Had anyone seen anything unusual on the street? No one had. I even drove up and down, scanning for any out-of-place vehicles. Nothing. What haunts me most is how precise their inquiry was. They didn't ask general questions like, "Did you see something?" Instead, they asked, "Did you see it land?" It felt like they already knew exactly what we'd witnessed and were just confirming our observation. Their departure, no car, no sound, no trace, remains completely inexplicable. The ferry ride from St. Stode. George's was meant to be routine. Late July, with cool Atlantic air and a pale blue sky, everything seemed normal. Earlier that evening, I'd been on the eastern cliffs filming gulls and waves with my phone. That's when the lights appeared. Low over the water, maybe half a mile offshore, 3 white lights with a green tinge, moving together as if connected. They weren't helicopters. There was no sound. As I watched, they shifted, splitting apart and reforming into a triangle. I filmed until the image became grainy, then suddenly, they vanished. Boarding the ferry, I noticed 2 men sitting near the rear cabin window. Dark suits, white shirts, black ties, unusual attire for a summer evening ferry. Their hats sat neatly beside them. Perfectly still, they didn't speak to each other or anyone else. At first I didn't think much about them, but something felt off. The ferry crossing was unlike anything I'd experienced before. As I walked near the gangway, I noticed two men who stood out immediately. They weren't like the other passengers. No scrolling, no glancing around, no shifting in their seats, just pure, unbroken staring at the ocean. These men were peculiar, both tall and pale, with dark hair combed straight back. Their skin looked almost unnaturally smooth, like someone had carefully airbrushed every detail. When I walked past their table, something felt off. The shorter one had hands folded perfectly still, long, thin fingers not moving an inch. I took a seat a few rows behind them, watching closely. They didn't blink. The woman with two kids walking to get snacks didn't even look their way. Nobody seemed to notice how strange they were. At one point, the taller one turned his head slightly. I could swear his lips formed a silent word. The other man tilted his head almost imperceptibly, as if listening to something nobody else could hear. When the ferry horn sounded near the dock, both men straightened simultaneously, like soldiers coming to attention. After we disembarked, I lingered on the pier, pretending to tie my shoe. I watched the other passengers, fishermen, teenagers with bikes, couples, but these two men had vanished. I checked the ferry windows. Their booth was empty. No one was on deck. Later, I would review the grainy, shaky phone footage of strange lights. Those two men had appeared and disappeared so quickly, leaving nothing but questions. This happened during a grey autumn, the kind of damp chill that cuts through multiple layers. I was working my family's farm outside Stirling Shear, a quiet life of sheep and barley that had been mine since I could drive a tractor. The first odd thing occurred just after dusk on a Wednesday. Not I was splitting wood in the yard that afternoon when a black car rolled down our muddy lane. It looked too polished for our rough track. Two men stepped out, both tall, dressed in dark suits and hats that seemed out of place, too crisp and clean for our rural setting. Earlier that night, I'd noticed something unusual in the north pasture. At first I thought it was moonlight, but these were three distinct lights hanging in a tight triangle above the field. They moved almost lazily, yet remained perfectly aligned. No sound, no engine noise, just an eerie glow moving silently overhead. The men looked odd. They were incredibly pale, like they hadn't seen sunlight in years. Their faces were smooth, almost waxy, and they blinked far less than normal. One spoke first, with an accent I couldn't place, not English, not Scottish. It wasn't a question, more a statement. I'd watched those lights for maybe 10 minutes before they suddenly rose in unison and shot upward, vanishing into the low clouds without a trace. That night, sleep eluded me. I kept replaying the scene, searching rational explanation. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was some kind of military exercise. I called the nearby Air Force base and reported what I'd seen. The man who answered was polite but brief, simply noting the time and location before saying, "Thank you, sir." Something felt off about the whole interaction. Now these strange men wanted to see my sheep. I hesitated but felt compelled to comply. Something about their silent, waiting presence made me uneasy. I led them across the yard and through the gate to the south paddock, where most of the flock was grazing. They followed in complete silence, their shoes making almost no sound on the gravel. At the fence, the shorter one leaned against a post, staring intently at the sheep. The taller one turned to me and stated, "This is all of them." "Most," I answered, my voice small and uncertain. They nodded simultaneously, a slow, synchronized movement that made my stomach knot. Then, without another word, they turned and walked back to their car. I stood there, watching, unsure of what had just happened. Now, as I walked home from school that Tuesday in October, the street looked ordinary enough. Mrs. Ortega's dog was tied to the porch rail, kids' bikes leaned against steps, and cars were parked nose to curb. The day felt cold, not biting, but making my skin feel tight. I'd missed the bus after my algebra test ran longer than expected, so I decided to walk the half-mile home. I had my headphones in briefly, then took them out. I'm strange about wanting to hear the world when I'm alone. At first, it was just a light near the old water tower, one bulb that seemed to think it was a spotlight. But something was different. The light didn't sit on the power line pole. Instead, it hung in the air, about 20 feet above the sidewalk right past the library steps. A pale circle, like a paper plate with a soft glow. No halo, no beam, Just a steady disc. I stopped walking. My hands were tucked in my hoodie pockets, and my breath formed small clouds. The light was perfectly still. No flickering, no humming. The leaves didn't move when it shifted slightly to the left. As I followed the street, it followed me too, maintaining the same distance like a shadow. I know that sounds dramatic, but that's exactly what happened. Later that week, something strange happened with the sheep. Normally they'd crowd the south paddock until I guided them toward the sheds. But this night, they refused to go near it. They bunched together by the gate, bleating, stamping their hooves, refusing to move no matter how much I tried to coax them. I ended up herding them into the smaller eastern field instead. At first I thought it was just animals being unpredictable, but it kept happening. Every night after, they avoided the south paddock like something was wrong with it. Even during the day, they stayed away, huddled at the far edge if they wandered in at all. A week later, I walked the field myself, trying to spot anything unusual. The grass looked normal. No scorch marks, no broken fences, just the same pasture I'd tended for years. But standing there, I felt a strange heaviness, like the air itself was pressing down. I can't explain it better than that. And some men had been at the fence earlier that day, gripping the wood. By the time I caught up, they were already in the car. The engine started with a low purr, and they drove back up the lane without looking at me once. Since then, I haven't seen the men again. Haven't seen the lights either, but the sheep still won't settle in that field. It's as if they know something's there that I don't. Here's my rewritten version. Something followed me home that day. A weird light, drifting and moving in ways that didn't make sense. I was walking home from school when TJ from homeroom passed by with his skateboard, completely ignoring everything around him. My phone's camera was open to some messy text messages, so capturing any evidence was impossible. The light moved like a polite, quiet drone as I walked through the cul-de-sac and into my neighborhood. With its line of trees and scattered houses, the light kept pace. It stopped right by Mr. Levin's garage, looking foggy and translucent. Then suddenly, it shot forward, not in a burst, but in a quick, deliberate motion. A hot panic rose inside me, similar to the feeling you get as a kid when you think you've forgotten to lock the shed. I jogged faster, not looking back until I was almost home. Claire from across the street noticed something was off and asked if I was okay. I said I was fine and quickly went inside, locking the door and turning on the porch light. In the kitchen, I told my mum about the light. She smiled that typical mum smile, the one that says, "My kid is saying something weird again." My brother called from college, talking about a friend's bus trip. The oven was on, and my mum had a work call coming up. I went to my room, but the uneasy feeling remained. The next morning, I went to school early. Fog had settled overnight, making the front steps wet. Two men in dark suits stood by the flagpole, the kind of men you only see in movies about secrets. Their shoes were so polished they reflected the concrete. One of them looked directly at me, as if he'd been expecting me. He walked over with his companion, stopping just a few feet away. No. Two men approached me at school. They didn't quite register at first. One had a small scar on his cheek, and they both carried a faint scent like hospital lemon cleaner. My brain did what brains do in awkward moments. I almost asked if I could help them. The taller man spoke first. "Good morning. We're following up on an observation. Did the sphere follow you again last night?" His words hung heavy in the air. "Sphere," I said, realizing I hadn't mentioned a sphere to anyone. I'd only talked about a light. My tongue felt thick. People always say to be honest, but right then, honesty seemed risky. The shorter man watched me silently. He didn't write anything down, just observed with a strange attention that made my skin prickle. "Describe its motion and color," he said. "Were there any sounds? Any electronic interference?" I could have lied. I could have walked away. Instead, I wanted to see their reaction. So I told them it followed me from the library, pale, like a white with a hint of blue. Mostly moving slowly, then suddenly sliding to the curb. No sound. My phone got fuzzy when I opened the camera. They exchanged a look, like they were reading from the same script. "Thank you," the tall one said. "Continue your routine. Avoid sharing the observation. Keep to usual channels. Report any physiological symptoms." "Report to who?" I asked. He didn't answer. The shorter man added, "If it follows again, maintain distance. Do not attempt to interact." Then they were gone. Nobody at school seemed to notice. The janitor kept sweeping. Miss Patel buzzed through the doors on autopilot. Their visit felt like an invisible errand in a visible space. I spent the day acting normal, answering questions, taking notes, but I watched everything. Hallway light fixtures, the way fluorescent lights hum differently when something feels off. At lunch, TJ asked about a traffic accident. I said I hadn't seen the news. No. He mentioned a strange translator error in the feed, and by the time the bell rang, something felt off. Dozens of small things seemed to rattle loose in my head. That night, restless and unable to sleep, I walked to the corner and stood with my hands in my pockets, looking up at the sky. Wet asphalt and the neighbor's grill scented the air. No lights, no disturbance. Gus, Mrs. Ortega's dog, trotted by with his owner, giving me a look that suggested I should be inside, where people typically stay after dark. I went home and left the porch light on anyway. In the days following the men's visit, background noises began to feel like signals. My phone's alarm blinked a minute early before correcting itself. The school security camera facing the parking lot captured a 15-second morning clip where 2 frames suddenly showed only static before resuming normally. Maya, who sits behind me in history, claimed she didn't remember me telling Mr. Tape and Mr. Nestory Harrove about the test, even though I'd explicitly mentioned it 3 times that morning. It felt like facts were sliding in and out of place around me. A week later, on a rainy Thursday, I was called to the office. Expecting trouble for something trivial like texting or skipping the locker, I was surprised when the principal asked me to sit. The 2 men were there again, seated in folding chairs as if they'd always been part of the scene. The taller one wore the same thin smile. "We just want to ensure you're coping," the principal said. "Any headaches, sleep issues, dizziness?" I mentioned feeling tired and jumpy, carefully avoiding any reference to the second night I'd gone out, watching my hands tremble when reaching for a pen. The men didn't ask about the photos on my phone or the route I'd walked. They simply nodded, left, and the principal advised me to visit the nurse if needed. I tried to move on. I ran errands for my mom, did homework, went to soccer practice, normal things. But the light kept visiting my thoughts. On the 3rd night after their school conversation, I woke to a car door sound and the unsettling feeling of being watched. The porch light was on, but no one was there when I pulled back the curtains. The next morning's silence felt like someone had stolen away an entire chorus of birds. I never saw the men again, not in person. Twice I spotted a black sedan. Late one August evening, when the cicadas still hummed in the darkness, I pulled my car onto the gravel shoulder near County Road 14. Thick corn stalks towered around me, dark and imposing in the humid air. As a freelance photographer returning from a barn shoot, I'd noticed something unusual. 3 soft white lights hovering low over the cornfield. These weren't like planes or drones. They drifted, shifted subtly, then realigned themselves in a pattern that felt deliberate. I parked and killed the headlights, watching as the distant town's glow painted the sky a dull orange with a few scattered stars. Setting my camera on the hood, I began taking shots at different exposures. Through the viewfinder, the lights looked sharper and brighter than they appeared to my naked eye. I captured about a dozen photographs. At one point, the lights faded completely, only to reappear in an entirely different position. The only sounds were the background buzz of insects. Afterward, I kept the experience to myself. I told my brother nothing, knowing people would either make a hero or a liar out of such a story, and I wanted neither. Strange how ordinary things become connected to an event like this. I started checking my phone camera more frequently, not to get proof, but because the act made me feel safer. My hands moved a bit quicker when walking home. Sometimes, when waiting at a crosswalk and a nearby light blinked, I'd feel a tiny spark of panic that would quickly extinguish. Time continued. Classes changed. Seasons shifted. The lights never followed me after that first night. Maybe they wanted something and got it. Maybe they wanted nothing at all. The men in suits never contacted me, never sent a letter, never reappeared. Life carried on. The school janitor swept floors. My phone's camera still captures grainy sky images. Sometimes the strange isn't about grand mythic moments. It's about the subtle enrollment of details afterward. A blank security file frame, a neighbor's dog that no longer barks in its usual way. These small details made me watch the sky longer than I probably should have. They're why I now lock my door twice each night, a habit I've maintained ever since. Not the power lines buzzed faintly along the road, creating a strange but not threatening atmosphere. Suddenly, the lights blinked out completely. After waiting a while, I decided to head home. That's when they appeared. Two men stood by the rear of my car near the trunk. Their appearance was striking: black suits, white shirts, and black ties. The suits looked heavy, like winter funeral attire, yet neither man seemed affected by the heat. One was significantly taller than me, at least half a foot, while the other was only slightly shorter. Their black shoes remained impeccably clean despite the dusty gravel. I hadn't heard them approach. One moment I was adjusting my camera settings, and the next they were simply there. "Evening, ma'am," the taller one said in a low, even voice that barely carried across the open field. "We'd like to see the camera you used." I gripped the camera tighter and asked who they were. They didn't respond. The shorter one repeated the exact same line, word for word, as if reading from a script. Their delivery was unnervingly uniform, no accent, no emotion. When I asked why, they stared silently for a full 5 seconds. Their faces were pale but not sickly, impossibly smooth in a way that made determining their age difficult. Dark hair was parted precisely on the side, cut short like in an old photograph. Finally, the taller one spoke, his lips barely moving. "To verify," he said. I stepped back toward the driver's door, declaring I wouldn't hand over my camera. Simultaneously, they both smiled, an identical, rehearsed expression with a small upturn at the corners, revealing perfectly even teeth. Without another word, they turned at the exact same moment and began walking down the road, away from me. No car, no flashlight, just black suits and pale faces in the humid darkness. Their shoes crunched on the gravel for a few seconds before falling silent. When I looked up, they had vanished. The road stretched long and straight, with no possible turnoff. Shaking, I got into the car and locked the doors. My hands trembled so much that I dropped the camera on the passenger seat. As I drove back to town, the radio dissolved into static for about a mile. It was late November, cold and drizzly, with darkness falling early in my small one-story house on the edge of a farming town in upstate New York. The kind of quiet place where everyone knows each other. I work at the feed store. Nothing exciting. 2 nights earlier, I'd been stacking wood behind the house when I spotted something strange in the sky. 3 dull orange lights moving in a slow triangle, completely silent. They passed overhead, stopped for a few seconds, then shot east faster than anything I've ever seen. I didn't tell a soul, not my neighbors, not my co-workers. I didn't even take out my phone. That Friday night, I was watching TV with the dog at my feet when someone knocked on the front door. These weren't quick taps, but 3 steady knocks. Nobody drops by out here without calling first, and I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, a tall, pale man in a black suit stood on the porch. His white shirt and black tie looked formal, and his polished dress shoes seemed absurdly out of place on a muddy farm road. He didn't smile or introduce himself. I kept checking the rearview mirror after that night, but saw only empty road. Back home, I loaded the photos from my camera. The first few were normal, dim shapes of the cornfield, some faint glows where lights had been. Halfway through the sequence, one shot showed 2 men in the cornfield between the rows, facing the camera. They were blurry, but unmistakable. Black suits standing among the corn stalks, looking straight at me. I hadn't seen anyone in the field while shooting. No movement, no rustling leaves. In the next shot, they were gone. Just empty rows of corn. I shut the laptop and walked around my house, turning on every light. It was after midnight. Outside, only crickets broke the silence. 2 days later, at the grocery store, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was my own photo, zoomed in on the 2 men's faces. No message, no caption. When I got home, the camera battery was dead, though it had been full the night before. The memory card was missing, and I know I didn't remove it. I've replaced my locks since then. I still go out on shoots, but never alone and never near that cornfield. Good evening. May I come inside to ask a few questions? No introduction, no badge, no warmth. I was busy and asked what this was about. He tilted his head slightly, almost bird-like, and stated precisely that he was gathering information about aerial phenomena observed from my property on November 23rd at 6:37 p.m. The exactness of the time caught my attention immediately. I hadn't told anyone about what I'd seen, not a single person, not even written it down anywhere. How do you know about that? I asked. He didn't respond, simply repeating, "We're gathering information." Skin looked grey like old paper, his lips thin and colourless. His eyes were incredibly dark, so dark that pupils and irises blended together, and he didn't blink, not once. Standing in the drizzling evening with my porch light buzzing overhead, he began asking extraordinary specific questions. Describe the light's arrangement. Describe their travel direction relative to true north. Describe any sound level or electromagnetic interference changes. He used the phrase electromagnetic interference as if reading from a script. I gave short answers, mostly hoping he'd leave. 3 lights moving east, silent, nothing else. When I said nothing else, he tilted his head again and stared at me intensely. A blank yet penetrating look, seemingly waiting for me to elaborate or correct myself. "Have you shared this observation with any person or agency?" he finally asked. "No," I replied. He slipped his notepad back into his jacket without writing anything. "We thank you for your cooperation," he said, with no further identification. He turned and stepped off the porch. I closed the door, my heart racing. The entire interaction lasted maybe 3 minutes. In the living room, with my dog still nearby, I tried to calm down. Moments later, I decided to check where he had gone. Maybe catch a license plate. I reopened the door. The porch was empty. The gravel driveway showed no trace. No car, no footprints in the wet ground. The drizzle continued. I was driving home on Route 9, the stretch that runs past Miller's farm, with its broken fence and squat red barn. Around 10:30, the rain had backed off to a steady mist that made the road glisten. I'd been looking at the GPS, thinking about nothing in particular, when a pale light appeared over the field to my right, just above the stalks. At first I thought someone had left a tractor light on, but it hung there motionless. No beam swept across the field, just a soft white glow like a porch lantern floating 10 or 12 feet off the ground. I did what most people do. I slowed and then stopped on the shoulder, hazard flashes blinking in the drizzle. The car went quiet except for the wipers. The light stayed where it was. Steady, it didn't pulse. It didn't make a sound. Later, back home, something felt off. My dog was whining softly. He almost never does that. I grabbed a flashlight and walked out to the road. It's straight for about a quarter mile in both directions. With the drizzle and my porch light behind me, I should have been able to see a tail light, or at least a dark shape moving away. Nothing, just the sound of rain on the leaves. I went back inside, locked the door, and sat down. My hands were shaking. An hour later, while making tea, I realized something else. When he'd been standing on the porch, I never heard the rain on his coat. I should have been dripping. Mine was soaked after a minute outside. He didn't have an umbrella, no beads of water on his shoulders. His shoes, polished leather, had been spotless. The next morning, I checked my security camera, an old motion-activated thing over the garage that records in short clips whenever someone comes up to drive. There was nothing from that night. No car pulling in, no person walking up, no one leaving. Just the normal, empty driveway. I thought about telling someone, but what would I even say? That some guy in a suit knew the exact time I saw 3 lights in the sky and then disappeared into thin air. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, no postmark. Inside was a single piece of plain white paper with the words, "Thank you for your cooperation," typed it in the same flat, precise way he'd spoken. I didn't keep the letter. I burned it. Since then, I haven't seen any strange lights. But at night, if a car slows down near my place, I find myself turning off the lights and waiting until it passes. Something strange happened that night. At first, I thought it was just farm equipment dragged out as a teenage prank. A weird roadside display meant to spook people. But there was no vehicle, no cab, no wires connecting anything to the ground. After a few seconds, it moved. Not like any aircraft I'd seen before. It slid sideways about 30 yards, then stopped completely. Only then did I notice my radio had gone to static, first a faint buzz, then pure white noise, drowning out my local station. The dashboard clock blinked 0 momentarily before resetting to the correct time. What else could I do but take pictures? My phone shots came out blank. Just a smear where light should have been, then nothing. Phone cameras never capture weird moments clearly, and these were possibly the worst evidence I'd ever have. A dozen mediocre images that would convince no one but me. When the light suddenly vanished, like someone flipping a switch, I drove on, hands slightly shaking. The field looked ordinary under my headlights. Anywhere else, I might have blamed a tired brain or strange atmospheric conditions. But here, the road felt unnervingly empty. No trucks, no other cars, not even crows on the fence. The world had shrunk down to something tight and confined. The next morning, a black sedan appeared 2 houses down from my home. Parked under the sycamores, it looked pristine, no rust, no bumper stickers, with a license plate that didn't trigger any recognition. I assumed it belonged to a neighbor or was a company vehicle, but the car remained in the same spot the following afternoon and the day after that. Always cold, always stationary. Sometimes the driver's seat looked empty. Sometimes a shadowy figure occupied the passenger side. I didn't approach it. On the third day's midpoint, I watched it pull away when I was heading to the hardware store. Its movement was unremarkable, just enough to turn the corner and disappear. It looked like any ordinary black sedan until I tracked its movement and noticed something odd. It never exceeded the speed limit. I followed it casually, maintaining a steady pace half a block behind a delivery truck. When the truck turned, the sedan smoothly eased into the space left by its tail. I dismissed it as mere coincidence and went about my day. That evening, during the rain, I saw the car again at the end of the cul-de-sac, and I'd been to this diner on Pine Street before, the kind of place that keeps a pot of coffee on all night and has a board claiming pie is fresh even at 2 a.m. I parked and went inside for a hash brown. When I came out, the black car was closer, idling by the pump. The driver's side tinted so dark you couldn't tell if anyone was inside. I told myself I was being paranoid. For 2 days, the car kept showing up in little ways. At the grocery across from the library, parked where it didn't belong, in the church lot. Each time I caught sight of it, that small tightness returned, like the skin between my shoulder blades had been pinched and held. I mentioned to a friend at work that I thought someone might be following me. He'd made a joke last month about hanging around the UFO guy for a laugh, and his laugh didn't reach his eyes. He suggested calling the police if I was sure, but I didn't follow up to get a report. That Friday night, I stopped at the diner because I couldn't sit in my apartment in the dark staring at the street any longer. Inside, it was warm, the fluorescent lights too bright, with an old man eating beans at the counter. Ellie, the waitress who knew me by sight, brought coffee without asking. I took the booth by the window to watch the parking lot. The black car was there, as expected, parked far enough away that no one noticed, right at the edge of the street lamp. I didn't plan to stay long. Halfway through my sandwich, the doorbell chimed. 2 men in black suits walked in, not just dark jackets and slacks, but those old flat lapel suits that seemed from another decade. Plain white shirts, dark ties, clean shoes. They moved with purpose, taking brisk, economical steps that wasted no motion. One had ash-colored hair combed straight back. The other had a crease at the corner of his mouth like he didn't mind saying uncomfortable things. Both had that tidy Palace City people get after a long day inside. They came straight to my booth. "Excuse me," the taller one said flatly. "Are you feeling well since the event?" For a moment, I thought he was joking. I responded, "What event?" as if I didn't know what he meant. I'd told no one about the lights. I hadn't even told Ellie. The taller man's eyes were weirdly calm and unblinking. The shorter one blinked, but it looked deliberate, like the blink was calculated. A faint scent of aftershave and rain surrounded them, and the air seemed to grow colder. I laughed, the way people do when uncertainty grips them. "The lights over Miller's Field?" I asked. But I didn't explain. Saying anything out loud would make it more real. "Good," the taller man said. His words were clipped, like bullet points on a memorized card. "Continue your routine. Avoid sharing details. Keep your frequency normal. We will monitor." "What do you mean, monitor?" My voice sounded foreign. The diner had gone completely silent. An old man's fork hung mid-air. Ellie stared down at the register, her order pad forgotten. The shorter man placed a finger on the table, as if marking an invisible surface. "We are checking for adverse effects," he said. "You reported no auditory disturbances." They glanced at me, then simultaneously tilted their heads at the exact same angle. The taller man's smile didn't reach his eyes, matching perfectly with the shorter man's expression in the same split second. "I haven't said anything," I said sharply. Good, they responded. The taller one added, keep to your schedule. Maintain social contacts. Do not conduct experiments. The words hung heavily in the air. I couldn't recall planning any experiments. As a courier, I wasn't someone who set up cameras in fields. Their language was clinical, like a nurse checking medication compliance. I realized these weren't police or local officials. This wasn't a routine checkup. Around me, the diner's atmosphere had changed. The old man lowered his fork. A woman by the pie case turned pale. A young cook in a baseball cap concentrated intensely on flipping eggs, as if his focus could make the strange men disappear. The men stood there for maybe 2 minutes before turning and walking to the door with the same slow, economical pace. Silent. Through the rain-streaked window, I saw their black car with its headlights off and tinted glass. They stepped into the mist and reached the car in just a few strides. The taller one opened it, and then they were gone. The black car had barely left when I started replaying everything that happened. 2 men, no introductions, just a procedural interaction that felt more like closing a file than a confrontation. Their behavior wasn't violent, and they weren't threatening in the way someone with a weapon might be. Earlier that day, I'd been at the diner. A waitress approached, her voice slightly too bright. I left a $10 bill on the table and walked out without finishing my coffee. Outside, rain was falling. Under streetlights, I thought about their cryptic words and the strange instruction to avoid sharing details. That night, every light in my apartment stayed on. I stared at the door, half expecting a soft knock or the squeak of tires. The water by my bed tasted metallic. Sleep came in fragments. I started waking earlier than usual, as if anticipating an unscheduled appointment. The black car appeared less frequently, but when it did, I felt a sense of impending something in my gut, like a countdown approaching 0. I glimpsed the men once more at a gas station, reflected in pumped glass, black suits, pale faces moving past. They didn't approach. They didn't need to. Their presence was the message. I haven't told the police. I shared the story with Aaron, who writes obituaries and turns everything into a potential joke. He suggested ignoring it, treating it like a weird couple of nights. Interestingly, his lack of detailed questions made me share more. The next day, he recommended writing everything down. So I did. Longhand and a notebook now sitting on my kitchen table. The pages are filled with timestamps, descriptions of their synchronized smiles, details about the car, the rain, the diner's coffee smell. I keep driving past Miller's Field, parking on the shoulder, staring into darkness. I'm searching for that light again, wanting proof, wanting to explain this to myself in one coherent sentence. Daylight reveals a banal landscape. Neat cornrows, a broken fence I've meant to report. But at dusk, there's sometimes an unexplainable glow on the horizon, something my camera can't capture. Now, when I lock my front door at night, I do it twice. I check the peephole repeatedly. Something has changed, and I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over. The black car reduced my world to the size of a curtain's edge. Deliveries done. I'd sit in the diner, eating a solitary late sandwich. Nobody inquired about my health anymore. The men didn't need to threaten me. Their check-ins were procedural. A file closed with mechanical precision, no warmth, just pure routine. Midnight found me posting a photo from the harbor road, tide low and quiet. 3 lights hung over the water like delicate lamps, moving deliberately above the bay. I'd pulled over, climbed the break wall, and captured several shots with my phone. My screen revealed something clearer than my eyes could. 3 white dots forming an uneven triangle, occasionally wobbling, occasionally steady. One simple sentence accompanied my upload to the town's Facebook group. Weird lights over the bay. Anyone else seeing this? The group typically buzzed with crab recipes and lost dog notices, so I expected nothing. I drifted to sleep with distant gull sounds and harbor hums seeping through my cracked window. Tuesday morning arrived like any other. I worked the early shift at Ancor and Elm, serving coffee and sandwiches to pre-dawn regulars. Soft, grey fog made lamps glow like moons. My post had minimal engagement, a boat sale advertisement and a casual, wow, nothing urgent. Comment: around 8 a.m., an older man in a wool coat settled at the corner table. More customers trickled in. By 9 o'clock, when the morning rush settled into steady rhythm, they appeared. 2 men in black suits, the kind Hollywood depicts in government films. No badges, No identification. They didn't move like locals or tourists, but with calculated precision. Heels set, shoulders rigid. They stopped exactly at my service counter, mid-muffin stack and coffee pour. No order, no small talk. Just two black silhouettes in the misty light coming through the front window. At first, they seemed ordinary enough. Clean suits, short hair, the taller one with a fade, the shorter with a narrow jaw. Something felt off. They stood over the counter, staring directly at me without blinking, not once. Initially, I thought they were just intensely focused on the pastry case, but the taller one's head tilted slightly, his eyes tracking me like an animal watching movement. He wasn't chewing, wasn't breathing heavily, he simply existed. They remained motionless for what felt like 15 minutes. Despite the busy cafe, the register line seemed unusually quiet. People would glance over, then return to their coffees as if nothing strange was happening. I continued making sandwiches, taking payments, while these two men stood like stationary figures someone had deliberately placed. Regulars behaved bizarrely. Pete, who always orders his sausage and egg at 9:30, would look up and smile as if everything was normal. A woman with a stroller sat nearby, scrolled through her phone, then left without acknowledgement. No one seemed perturbed. I felt increasingly uncomfortable. The sensible action would be to ask if they needed anything, but something held me back. Was it exhaustion? Social uncertainty? Eventually, I managed a simple question. "Can I help you fellas with anything?" The shorter one turned his head marginally. No real facial movement. No sound. The taller one nodded, almost imperceptibly, as if that answered everything. My voice echoed awkwardly in the strange silence. They carried themselves with an unmistakable authority, shoulders slightly forward, chin set. I felt thoroughly examined. Throughout the espresso rush, they remained a constant presence, subtly shifting positions, always precise, always calculated, like actors in a carefully choreographed scene. When the rush finally thinned and I moved to wipe the counter, they were still there. At least 15 minutes had passed. No newspapers folded, just so they stood there, motionless. The taller one glanced at my name tag, then looked directly at me. His first words came flat and measured, like a recorded message. "Everything all right?" His question landed heavily, not because of its content, but because it came from someone who'd been watching me without blinking. I answered reflexively, yes, everything was fine. Then I wondered why I was even responding. The shorter man cut straight to the point. "Have you slept since the event?" He continued without pause, asking about headaches, ear ringing, disrupted appetite. The word event made the coffee in my hand feel suddenly sharp and acidic. I hadn't told anyone, not my mother, not my boss, not even the online group where I'd half-jokingly mentioned the lights. I'd only posted a few pictures with a minimal response. When I explained I'd seen lights over the bay and photographed them, it felt uncomfortably close to a confession. They listened, expressionless. The taller one instructed, continue routine. Avoid sharing details. Consult your physician if symptoms worsen. He placed a folded newspaper on the counter between us, leaving behind a single small rectangle of embossed ink resembling a barcode. The diner fell silent, that specific quiet that descends when significant conversation happens. Someone dropped a tray in the background, creating a momentary sound before silence returned. The two men straightened, signaling their imminent departure. They left exactly as they'd arrived, without touching the door, without drawing attention. Through the bell and into the fog, they vanished. What unsettled me most came next. The hat-wearing man who'd been at the corner table the entire time claimed he'd seen nothing. When I asked about the two men, he blinked and said no, he hadn't. He added a half-joking, half-concerned comment about it being just me. Ellie at the register had no recollection, despite being right by the espresso machine. If they came in, I would have taken their orders, she said. A puzzled frown suggested she thought I was simply tired. Pete said he'd been on his phone. The woman with the stroller recalled nothing of our encounter. At the cafe, I was lost in a light fog, everything blurry. Cameras on the wall showed people in usual patterns, mouths opening and closing, but something felt off. Two men had been standing by the counter earlier, though no footage captured them. Someone from the town's Facebook group sent me a private message after I posted a photo, asking if I was okay. They'd called a waiver alert, and by noon, Harbour Patrol was investigating reports about lights. I texted back that everything at the cafe was fine and tried to focus on making sandwiches. Later, when showing my roommate the pictures, I noticed something strange. In my favorite shot of 3 lights over the water, 2 dark shapes stood just beyond the shoreline. Like telephone poles, they were barely visible. Zooming in revealed 2 figures exactly where the men had been that morning. One taller with hands forward, the other shorter with a tilted head. Ellie, who'd worked mornings for 6 years, suggested I might be overtired. "You've got a lot going on," she said softly. "Maybe you're just jumpy." I wanted to argue but stayed silent, stacking muffin cases until my arms ached. That night, I rode the late bus home under a clearing sky. The fog lifted, lights over the bay vanished. My roommate's friends were loud, but I couldn't settle. At 2 a.m., I got up to use the bathroom and found the kitchen dark, my phone lighting up with a mysterious notification. A direct message from an unrecognizable user contained only the photo I'd taken of the 3 lights. The timestamp predated my original post. No username, no caption. I stared at the little card they'd left, noticing a dull rectangle where ink had been pressed into the paper. In the following days, I expected something to happen. I waited to be questioned, told to stop posting, or given instructions. I drove past the harbour, scanning the water and sky for anything unusual. Sometimes a black car would appear, adding to the growing tension. The image looked like nothing and everything simultaneously, leaving me unsettled and searching for answers. I was down by the marina, and when I looked twice, something felt off. My phone would glitch sometimes, freezing the camera app and showing a still from earlier, like I was stuck on yesterday. The cafe's security system logged a temporary fault during a 10-second stretch at 9:15, where the video feed pixelated and returned without audio. We replaced the cable, and nothing else happened. When I brought up the lights, people at the shop changed the subject and joked about Maya's late-night lighthouse spotting, passing me a bite of muffin. Later that week, when I checked the Facebook thread, the original post had been taken down. A moderator sent me a private note saying, "Sometimes posts get flagged and removed." No one else remembered seeing the 2 women in the shop. The wall camera footage, though possible, just showed people moving, talking, and steaming milk. The supposed tableau of 2 women in black didn't appear except in my photo. I went home each night and locked the door, sleeping with the light on because it felt like the reasonable thing to do. The 2 women didn't come back. Lights over the bay were reported here and there for a couple weeks, then nobody talked about them anymore. My photos sat in my camera roll, a small piece of evidence that looked like a trick. I stopped toasting to that group and told my roommate a toned-down version. I had a weird morning, that was all. Sometimes while washing dishes, I would find myself watching the street long after everyone else had gone to bed. When the fog came in off the water, I'd step outside, breathe the cold damp, and check how the light hit the harbour, just in case. There was nothing dramatic, no knock at my door, no late-night visits from suits, just the regular world. My manager joked that maybe the city needed me to be their official weather reporter. I laughed and went back to work, keeping on pouring coffee. Outwardly, nothing changed. I kept counting days and maintaining my routines. But internally, something was different. I knew a shape the way you know the shape of a bruise. It wasn't obvious at first, but you can't unknow it. The 2 women had lingered by the counter, asked their questions without really asking, and left as if they had never been there at all. I kept the photo on my phone. Every so often I open it and stare at the background until the image blurs, hoping for some answer to step out of the grey. None has. The night was thick with July heat. Claire and I had the kitchen window open, hoping for any hint of a breeze. We live on my grandparents' land, 3 fields, an old red barn, and a row of sagging cottonwoods. Nothing special. Rex, our lab, was sniffing around the back porch while I lit the last mosquito coil. Suddenly, the henhouse went completely silent. At first, I thought a fox might be prowling, but then I realized every single bird had frozen in place, as if someone had hit pause on a video. A slow light began moving across the field. This wasn't like anything we'd seen before. No plane, no strobes, just a single pale disc hovering low. If you looked carefully against the cottonwoods, you could tell it was about the height of telephone poles. It drifted deliberately from the east hedgerow toward the pond, gliding without a sound. The only evidence of its movement was a faint change in the grass, a cool blow sliding past like a painter's torch. I grabbed my phone. Instinct, I guess. But the photos were useless. Just washed out dots against blackness. Claire came out in her slippers, leaned on my shoulder, and muttered, "What the hell?" as if I might have an explanation. Rex sat by the fence unusually calm, watching with the focused attention dogs get when spotting a kite. We observed it drift past the pond and over the woodlot, then vanish into darkness like a light being tucked into someone's pocket. We didn't call anyone. Who would believe us? The sheriff would probably laugh us off, so we cleaned up, shut the windows, and tried to sleep. But strange things kept happening. The next morning, my pickup's battery was dead, though I'd left no lights on. At noon, my radio caught a split second of static odd, since reception is usually perfect. Claire's watch lost 5 minutes during the afternoon, then mysteriously found them an hour later. The hens refused to go near the east hedge, instead clustering tightly along the coop. Grandma Ellen, who's lived here 50 years, just shook her head when we told her. Weather can turn thick and still, creating conditions where odd things seem to happen almost naturally. Claire had mentioned a dream about voices in the grass, laughing it off over coffee but keeping her purse close. The game camera by the pond held something unsettling. 6 seconds of black, then static, then 6 more seconds of black. No image at all. The timestamp read 2 a.m., which didn't quite match when the hens went quiet or when the light had passed. We didn't talk much about the light. Claire put away dishes mechanically, pausing midway to rub her palms together, a telltale sign she was trying to stop thinking about something. Maybe we should call somebody, she said, just to have it on record. I agreed we would. Handle it the next day, which felt safer than immediate action. When he arrived the following evening, soft light was still hanging in the air. His knock was polite, like a neighbor returning a borrowed cup of sugar. I wasn't expecting anyone. Wiping my hands on a towel, I opened the door. He stood on the porch in a dark suit that looked freshly pressed, shoes immaculately clean, no hat, his close-cropped hair the color of river rock. He seemed more suited to a downtown office than a gravel farm drive. "Evening," he said, skipping small talk entirely. "I apologize for the intrusion. May I have a glass of water before we discuss last night?" The phrase struck me as odd. He spoke as if our discussion was expected, not a surprise. Behind me, Claire watched from the kitchen island. Grandma Ellen rocked in her chair, knitting needles clicking. The dog shifted and gave a single sharp bark. "I don't know," I started. "Who are you?" "We are conducting routine inquiries regarding observed aerial phenomena," he replied. "A glass of water would be appreciated. Lupping, the county fair was in town, and people in suits sometimes stop on farms for various reasons. Insurance, zoning, business. When he arrived, I noticed his unusual face first. His eyes were an indeterminate color, not quite brown, not quite gray, and he didn't blink while speaking. I handed him a glass of water from the tap, which he took politely. His fingers wrapped around the glass in a way that suggested he'd done this 1,000 times before. But he never drank. When I realized he hadn't lifted the glass to his lips, I felt foolish. "You okay?" I asked. He set the glass on the porch rail and responded with a precise, economical voice. "Thank you. Now, would you describe what you observed?" He didn't write anything down, didn't take my phone, didn't ask for footage. He simply asked and waited. So I told him everything. About the pale disk hovering over the pond, how it slid into the trees and vanished. I explained how the hens had frozen, how Rex sat watching, how the camera by the post captured only a blank clip at 0212 a.m. Claire mentioned her watch, losing time. Grandma Ellen spoke of her dream. He nodded after each detail, as if cataloguing information in some internal ledger. Once he leaned forward and asked about auditory phenomena or headaches. I thought of Brent at the feed store talking about tinnitus and assured him, no ears ringing, nothing that would prompt a doctor. When I finished, he said, "We thank you for your cooperation." Then something strange happened. Without taking the glass or putting it in his coat pocket, he stood and delicately balanced 2 fingers on its rim. He walked off the porch, down the drive, through the next gate, and toward the pond. I watched him move between the trees like someone navigating a familiar hallway. Within 30 yards, the light through the leaves absorbed him completely. He vanished. We remained motionless. Claire had dropped her dish towel. Grandma Ellen's knitting slipped from her hands. Rex flattened his ears and whined softly. The untouched glass sat on the porch rail. Hours passed. The sun dipped. Corn shimmered. Crickets awakened. Darkness settled. And Claire went to get a glass and poured it down the sink. Nothing remained. Not a drop spilled or evaporated as might happen with an open container on a breezy summer day. The glass looked untouched, dry and cool. When I ran my fingers inside, no trace of water existed, no hint of mineral rings on the edges. Walking the path to the gate revealed no disturbance. The grass stood undisturbed, with no footprints, suggesting anyone had been there to take a drink. That night, we sat with closed windows and the porch light on, and sleep came fitfully. We knew farms, knew coyotes and storms, understood the small dangers that roam fields, but this felt different. Mornings brought strange occurrences. The coop door would be shut, though I'd left it open. My pickup's tailgate would be locked when I'd left it down. At noon, the shop radio cut to static for 2 seconds, regardless of station. Grandma Ellen started leaving her porch light on until I asked her to stop. It kept the hens close to the yard and let Rex sleep better. The suited man never returned. No car ever parked on the road that might match him or his description. The glass remained suspicious until I finally tucked it away in the cupboard with other dishes, trying to treat it like something ordinary. Sometimes I look at that cupboard and think of frozen hens, of a quiet field where a single light moved like a hand sweeping velvet, of how the man's tongue didn't move when he spoke, of how he left a full glass of water untouched. I don't call this an event or a visitation. I'm not spinning tales about UFOs or hidden secrets. I share this story because that's what people do when the world offers small, bright mysteries. The man asked for water, left it on the porch, and by morning it was gone. We continued our chores. Seasons passed as they always do. The hens returned to pecking near the east hedge, and some nights I still glance at the pond. I was on the roadside, engine running, when the first car passed, seeming not to see anything at all. It was near midnight, and the rain had gone soft, not hard enough to sheet the pavement, just enough to make highway lights smear. I was returning from a job in the next county. Nye was driving down a stretch of highway where the white line and occasional diner sign were my only companions. Suddenly, my headlights started acting strange. They shifted from their normal dim yellow to a bright blue in an instant, as if someone had quickly turned a knob. Other drivers seemed completely unaffected, speeding past me without slowing down. To the east, a light caught my attention. At first, I thought it was a construction sign, but something was different. It hovered about 100 feet above the guardrail, motionless and soft, like an abandoned lamp suspended in midair. My hands were shaking, so I pulled over and killed the engine. Rain softly hissed on the hood while my phone showed no signal. I didn't attempt to film. That would have felt like admitting fear. Instead, I watched. Cars continued passing beneath the light, close enough that I could have flagged them down, but nobody stopped. It seemed like the vehicles were moving around something invisible, something unnoticed. The light was a clean disk, a pale color I couldn't immediately categorize. Later, when I tried describing it in my phone's notes, soft white with a blue wash felt inadequate. Suddenly, the radio erupted into static, not a gradual fade, but an abrupt white roar as if disconnected from any rational source. My dashboard clock blinked 0 momentarily before resetting, and the digital thermometer flickered 2 degrees before returning to normal. A truck passed 2 lanes away. The driver stared straight ahead, mouth moving, possibly speaking to a passenger. He didn't slow down. The light then slid sideways, not sharply, but like an object being gently nudged across a surface. The air felt different, not from wind or pressure, but as if someone had drawn an invisible curtain around me. I oddly recalled a pot of coffee left on a burner, how its aroma lingers and fills a space. I pulled up to the pump, needing gas and coffee after a strange night on the highway. The gas station felt like a refuge from the eerie stillness I'd just experienced. Marco, a kid I knew from a previous job, waved me toward pump 3. Inside, the convenience store, diesel and peppermint gum hung in the air under harsh fluorescent lights. 2 men stood at the counter, completely out of place. Their dark suits and polished shoes looked like they'd stepped out of a downtown office, not a roadside stop. One was tall with a square jaw, the other shorter with a thin nose and a close-shaved beard. They were unnaturally still, positioned near the cooler, but not buying anything. When the doorbell rang, they both turned in perfect synchronization. Small details caught my eye: the taller man's slightly misaligned tie, a tiny scuff on the shorter man's right shoe. Their gaze locked onto me, and after my odd night on the highway, I felt like prey. "Sir," the tall one spoke, his voice completely neutral. "You were on Route 47 earlier this evening, were you not?" It wasn't really a question. Something about how he knew the route made me uneasy. I nodded. "Headed back from the mill," he continued. "Did you observe any aerial lights approximately 8 miles east of the bridge?" My throat tightened. "Yes," I said. "I did." They listened, not even breathing. Earlier driving home, I'd been cautious. The highway had shown me something strange, a light that winked out instantly like a photograph snatched from the sky. No sound followed, no echo, just darkness with distant truck tail lights ghosting across my dashboard. The shorter man studied his hands, then looked up with a gaze that made me read his expression twice. It wasn't anger or friendliness, just pure puzzlement. "Describe the exact color of the lights," he demanded. Not white or blue, but the precise color I remembered. It was an oddly specific request. Colors can be tricky, especially when recalling something from a nighttime encounter. I thought about how the light appeared, pale like the inside of an overcast day, but with a coolness that made its edges shift toward blue when I blinked. I described it exactly: a soft white with a blue wash, more blue than halogen, yet softer than neon. Like the blue you'd see in a pale winter window, clean but not electric. Their exchange was lightning quick, a subtle tightening at the corner of the taller man's mouth, the shorter one tilting his head as if mishearing something. The moment lasted less than a second, but felt pivotal. Suddenly, the taller man's face went blank. For the first time, he met my eyes fully, and I caught a flicker of confusion. "Excuse us," he said abruptly, causing Marco, bagging chips at the register, to glance up. They left exactly as they'd arrived, straight out the glass door, buying nothing, not even touching the pumps. They walked into the rain like men with a precise destination. I watched them go, expecting them to enter a car, but no vehicle sat in the station lot. For a moment, I imagined they ducked behind a truck, but no vehicle could hide 2 grown men without a sound. I paid for my coffee with cash, my card felt too slow, and Marco didn't ask for a receipt. Outside, the rain intensified, streetlights blooming into halos. I fumbled my car keys, feeling disoriented. The engine started, coffee's aroma filling the car as I watched the station's edge. 10 minutes later, a black sedan rolled slowly past the pump islands, then eased down a side street. I watched, half hoping they'd stop. But the car continued on. I drove home with the headlights low, and the radio on at a polite volume, not wanting the static to return. The week went back to normal in the outward sense. I worked, drove the county roads, mowed the yard, but inside, things were quieter. I noticed small glitches more readily. The clock on the oven would blink once at 2:12 a.m., then correct itself. My phone would flash a temporary loss of carrier while I was on. Hold! The electrical hum in the house took a soft skip. Once, while making dinner, I realized I'd been standing in the kitchen for 6 minutes, staring at the window, with no idea what had occupied my brain during that time. These little skips made me watch the edge of my life. I turned onto the main road, swallowed by the rain and the neon blur. For 3 mornings after that, I kept replaying the color question in my head. It was logically an odd thing to ask. People who study lights might want exit data or wavelengths. Citizens asking what shade of blue you saw is the sort of thing a journalist would bring up, not anonymous men in suits at a gas station. I told Marco the story the next time I went in for gas, partly to hear it out loud and check my own memory against his face. He shrugged like the sensible city kid he was and said he'd seen a car pull through the lot that night black and clean, but he hadn't thought to pay much attention beyond that. He didn't remember 2 men at the counter. Might have been those weirdos with the suits getting coffee, he said, and it sounded like he was guessing more than remembering. A week later, walking to the car, I noticed a small folded scrap of paper on the bumper of a pickup across the lot. I picked it up. It was a receipt from the gas station printed at 11:43 p.m. The timestamp matched the hour of the lights. On the back of the receipt, Someone had scrawled in neat block letters, color, and beneath it a single letter B. I folded the paper into my pocket and drove home. I thought about calling someone to say what I'd seen. The county office, the local paper, a blog. But every time I tried to form the call in my mouth, it sounded like a small private thing, like gossip you tell over the fence. When I did tell one friend, Cassia, she listened and said, "You were precise. Good. Keep it that way." She's a nurse, and she still sounded like she wanted to advise. I suppose what lingered afterward wasn't the men's question or the look they exchanged. We usually went out to Clear Pond to get away from town during long weekend trips. No cell service, one rickety boat launch, a vault toilet that smelled like wet pine. The five of us, me, Alex, Maya, Brent, Lena, and Omar, had a couple of tents set up on the ridge above the water and a fire pit down by the shore. It had rained in the afternoon, then the clouds thinned enough to leave that bright, hard summer sky you get when humidity hangs low. But the air is clearing. We'd eaten hot dogs, thrown a frisbee that kept getting blown off course, and then sat in a ring around the fire with our headlamp beams off, just listening. Around 11, when the bugs had gone quiet and Brent was telling a story about a raccoon in his neighbor's trash, things felt a little smaller and slower than usual. You notice the cadence of the night when you're not in a city. The frogs across the water had their own rhythm. The fire crackled. Then Maya, leaning back on her elbows with her face turned toward the lake, said, "Hey, do you see that? At first I thought she meant the moon, but the moon was where it always was. About 100 yards out over the pond, there were 3 pale lights. Not very bright, hanging maybe 20 feet above the surface. They moved together slowly like someone had 3 lanterns on cables and was walking them across the water, except there was no boat. No rope, no sound. They drifted a little, paused, then slid sideways in perfect unison. I can't say the world rearranged itself around this moment. The next time I drove past the area, there was no light. Nothing but the constant white glare of the rain-slicked road. I kept the memory folded away, like a receipt in a glove compartment. Eventually I threw it out when moving a box of path maps. The memory of that night hangs differently than other odd things. Less like a movie and more like a small missing tile in the floor you notice when you walk into the room. Their reactions surprised me in a way that had nothing to do with my being honest. They expected something else when I said the blue was a pale, clean winter blue. That brief confusion on their faces felt like a keyed mismatch. No threat, no alarm, but the same expression you get when a script you've recited 100 times breaks on the wrong page. They never came back. The station stayed open. Marco kept the coffee warm. The highway went on carrying its careless traffic. While we sat silent, 5 of us, our marshmallows forgotten on sticks. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few pictures. The camera couldn't capture it properly, just white smears. But the screen showed something, and seeing it there made it feel more real somehow. None of our theories quite fit. Ren thought they were fishing lights from the far shore. Lena suggested drone hobbyists from weekend campers near the inlet. The lights didn't behave like typical sources. They never flickered like LEDs or blinked like navigation lights. Even more strange, the surrounding nature seemed undisturbed. Frogs continued their chorus. Ducks didn't fly. No waves stirred. After 20 minutes, the lights faded as if someone had slowly turned down a dimmer. We lingered, half expecting them to reappear. Conversation dwindled into hesitant fragments. Exhaustion set in, so we retreated to our tents, following our usual routine, brushing teeth, setting boat launch alarms, checking the cooler. Sleep came fitfully that night. Lena woke once, convinced someone was walking around the tree line. Her headlamp revealed nothing when she checked. Morning brought nervous laughter about potentially calling the local paper with a mystery lights over Clear Pond story. More pressing was our desire for breakfast and coffee. While packing, we noticed a dark, unmarked sedan pulling up just after sunrise, barely 5 minutes past. Something felt off. People don't typically arrive at 8 to observe campers. 2 men in suits emerged, not cheap city attire, but formal, crisp, with neat ties and clean shoes. They approached slowly, deliberately. "Morning," said the taller man in a flat, neutral tone, like someone reading from a script. No name, no introduction, just a direct question. "We were told you observed aerial lights over Clear Pond last night. Would you describe what you saw?" A brief silence followed as we exchanged glances. I spoke first. 3 lights over the water. They moved together, no sound. Omar added they hovered about 20 feet up before fading. Bren noted they didn't resemble flares. The 2 men seemed out of place as we recounted our strange encounter. One was taller, the other shorter, and they stood with an unusual stillness while we spoke. No phones, no notepads. They simply watched us intently. From the start, they insisted we stick to pure observation. Describe only what you saw. They'd interrupt quietly whenever we tried to offer explanations. So we did. We detailed everything precisely. The water's reflections, the glow's color temperature, the exact spacing of what we'd witnessed. Their questions were peculiar. Did any electronics act strange? Bren mentioned a high-pitched ringing when the lights were brightest. Lena's phone had switched off and on twice while attempting a photo. Maya's pocket compass spun for a minute before settling. I shared how our camera photos were just smudged dots and the video files appeared glitchy. To each detail, they nodded silently. No writing, no recording. When we pressed them about their identity, they offered the same cryptic response, "We're conducting routine follow-up." It felt like answering a direct question with deliberate vagueness. We couldn't help noticing odd things about them. Their skin looked untouched by wind, dark coffee-ground eyes that didn't seem to blink properly. Maya whispered these observations to Omar, who shrugged, acknowledging but reluctant to comment. Instead of a typical investigation, they simply asked if anyone else knew about our observation. Had we posted on social media? Called anyone? I'd shared one photo on a local community page. Lena had mentioned it to someone. Their interest seemed carefully measured. 2 strangers in black suits approached our group at the ranger station. Their demeanor was calm and precise. They spoke with a matter-of-fact tone that could have easily been part of a corporate policy briefing. The shorter man asked for our names, waiting expectantly without reaching for a notebook or phone. I gave my name first, followed by Maya, Bren, Lena, and Omar. Something felt unsettling about the encounter. The men were polite but eerily controlled. When someone asked if they had names, the shorter man simply replied that names weren't necessary. His response clipped and final. The coffee pot hissed in the background as the taller man added, "We have the necessary identifiers." His tiny smile didn't reach his eyes. Then, without warning, they turned and walked toward the tree line. Their movement was deliberate, stepping off the path directly into the woods. We watched, stunned, as the morning light seemed to absorb their figures. They moved through the trees like they were walking down a hallway, leaving no trace, no rustling leaves, no broken branches, just a sudden absence where there had been moments before. Lena broke the silence, asking, "Where'd they go?" We realized they had completely disappeared. The light through the pines looked unchanged, as if they had never existed. We called the ranger, following the county's posted procedure, but he was out checking a damaged sign and didn't arrive for 40 minutes. When he finally came and we described the encounter, he nodded slowly, took our names, and made a note in his book. Later, when he drove off to check the trail cameras, there was nothing, no record, no evidence of the mysterious visitors. The empty grassy path and stretch of trees looked completely still. Our own car stood alone at the camp entrance, with no other vehicles in sight. No footprints marked the soft ground where the men had walked, and the mud near the boat launch bore only our tracks. We packed up faster than planned. Nobody felt like fishing or swimming after that strange encounter. Bren said the air seemed too thin, like you suddenly became aware of your own breathing. Maya laughed at small jokes that weren't really funny, her face pale. Lena kept rubbing her eyes, saying something about the man's coffee-colored eyes made her skin crawl. Omar drove in silence, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. We didn't stop until we passed the town signs, the highway swallowing the sound of our tires. Back home, I reviewed the photos again. One picture I thought captured the lights best showed a thin grey line near the tree line. A brief glimpse of the taller man's shoulder. Blown up, it was just grainy shadows. Nothing definitive. Maya's phone had a similar smudge. Bren mentioned his camera had corrupted the last 2 files. Lena claimed her compass had spun oddly for 15 minutes after leaving the site. Not knowing what to make of it, I posted in the local group thread using our real names, wanting an official record rather than rumors. Some people reported seeing strange lights days earlier. Others suggested LED kites. One comment warned people like us against camping alone. A woman who writes a bird-watching column asked to interview us but never followed up. The ranger dropped off a business card from the Division of Natural Lands, saying he'd check county dispatch about any missing person reports. No official call came, no local police responded. The two men who asked precise questions had simply walked into the trees and vanished without leaving any trace. We returned to our normal lives, work, apartments, grocery stores, bus stops. We kept the photos, feeling a mix of hope and frustration at their inconclusive nature. Bren mentioned the incident twice at work, but his colleagues just shrugged it off. Coffee in the same mug. Work shifts. The same guy at the bus stop who reads a paper without looking up. I've been hiking the Ridgeway Trail since childhood, knowing exactly when to put the phone away and when to take it out. This was August, with that hot dusk where the air hangs like a blanket and bugs make a steady shush in the leaves. Work had run over, so I started late and was above the third switchback when something appeared. At first I thought it was a reflection, maybe sunlight dragging off the stream's surface, or a guy with a flashlight and bad timing. But it was higher than the tree line, definitely not a reflection. Silver, perhaps 20 to 30 feet across, flattened on the bottom like a coin suspended on its edge. It moved slowly and deliberately. No jerks, no wings, and absolutely no sound. Birds kept flying past without spooked. The air remained unchanged. I filmed it because I couldn't not. My hand was slightly shaky, aware I might later need to defend this as not being a hallucination. Clip didn't capture much, just the usual grainy darkness, the silver a mere smear. But when I replayed it, the motion looked strange. The object slid left, paused, then drifted behind the ridgeline. I stayed put for a long time, sweating and thinking. That night, I didn't post the clip. I told myself I'd sleep on it, but sleep never came. The next day I watched the footage on my laptop, knowing digital things can't always be trusted. Cameras crop and compress, and phone cameras especially struggle in low light. Every so often, I open the folder with the photos. I zoom in on the smear, trying to steady it into a face. I tell myself not to make more of the day than there is. But every time I think of those two men turning toward the pines and vanishing, I find myself checking the door twice before bed. The men in suits were polite. They asked us to recount our observations without writing anything down. They said names weren't necessary. They walked into the woods and stopped being visible. That's what happened. I drove home. I called the number on the ranger's card once to ask if anything had turned up, left a message they never returned. The outdoor blog I write for is run by Ben, a close friend who responds to my messages with jokes only we understand. After sending him a noisy file with an odd shape, he suggested coming up next weekend with binoculars. That evening, while sitting at the kitchen table with a clip-on loop, strange things started happening. My wall clock slipped a minute forward, which I initially dismissed as a quirk of a cheap timepiece. Then my bedside alarm phone blinked 2:13 a.m., even though I'd turned it off. When I nudged it, the display corrected itself. These tiny incidents made me notice my surroundings differently. I began observing how light hit the windows, almost searching for hidden seams. 2 nights after my hike, a black sedan appeared, parked under the street lamp on the curb across from my house. I live on a narrow lane where overnight parking is uncommon, so this immediately felt odd. The car was an older model, but in near-perfect condition. Its windows were heavily tinted, headlights off, with no engine noise. The lane smelled of cut grass and warm asphalt. At exactly 2:13 a.m., which I confirmed on my phone, the vehicle sat motionless. My dog Gus, usually sound asleep, got up and padded to the door. He sat silently, staring out the window in a way that felt like a warning. Gus isn't skittish, so his behavior seemed significant. When the car finally left, it moved slowly and quietly, rolling away and disappearing at the first intersection, as if deliberately avoiding attention. For a week, the sedan appeared at the same time and place, like a precise ritual. I tried catching someone getting out, even stepping into the backyard in my shorts and flip-flops, calling out toward the lane. My voice sounded silly against the quiet stillness. The car remained unmoved. Once, I thought I saw a silhouette in the passenger side, someone leaning forward, but when I blinked, it vanished. The sedan had been parked at the same time each night. 2:13 a.m. I started tracking its appearances meticulously. My old analog watch sat by the wall clock, synchronized to make each measurement precise. Something about its routine was unsettling. I tried different strategies to understand what was happening. The cheap motion camera went up on the porch, aimed at the street. I left the hallway light on with blinds open. Some nights I'd sit in my car with the engine running, radio low, watching. Each night brought new theories. Maybe it belonged to a co-worker's friend. Perhaps someone was monitoring potential car thieves. The human brain loves finding patterns, and I was caught in one. Ben wanted the video clip. He believed he could enhance the image with special filters. I was reluctant to share what felt like my private evidence, something I might need to prove my experience to someone someday. I made copies, sliding one into the top drawer's SD card. On the 8th night, something changed. The car stayed until 3:01 a.m., a deviation that sent a small adrenaline kick through me. At 3:02, it turned down the block and stopped directly across from my house. I couldn't wait any longer. With keys and flashlight in hand, I went outside. Gus, my dog, followed, but stopped at the doorway. Not a confrontational type. The car's windows were black, its license plate seemingly ordinary, but when my flashlight hit it, the digits blurred into indistinct shapes. Feeling exposed, I called out, "Hey!" with forced assertiveness. Silence hung in the air. Then, with mechanical precision, the passenger window lowered slightly. A hand emerged, tapping the driver's side glass. A gesture so calculated it seemed almost rhythmic. No sound. No movement. Just the car idling with an unnerving, radioactive patience. I stood there, waiting for some human reaction. For footsteps, for a phone's buzz. Nothing came. The car's interior was a dark cave around me. For the next 2 days, the vehicle remained parked, with Gus silently watching from the window without making a sound. Ben arrived the following weekend, bringing his large binoculars and a skeptical expression. He spent an afternoon on my roof, advising me to calm down and take practical steps if I felt followed. That night, I spotted the sedan again and called 911. The dispatcher explained that without a clear threat, there wasn't much they could do. I felt both ridiculous and strangely safe enough to be dismissed. Strange occurrences began to accumulate. My phone, normally charging perfectly on the nightstand, displayed only a black screen one night. The cheap porch camera captured an empty street with a peculiar blank, a black rectangle about a meter wide, exactly where the car had been. Frame by frame, analysis revealed nothing. One instant the street existed, the next a column of emptiness, then the street returned. The timestamps were odd. The camera logged the clip at 21307, and the garage DVR showed a similar pattern, a brief grey interruption before returning to normal. When I tried playing the missing fragment on my laptop, the media player simply stalled. A week later, I followed the car from the intersection, maintaining a steady 50-yard distance. My hope was to get a glimpse of the plate. The vehicle moved with an unsettling consistency, never adjusting its speed. We passed stoplights, and at the second one something extraordinary happened. The car eased forward, then vanished without a blink or pause. The road ahead was completely empty, with the GPS showing a solid line. I checked the mirror. No brake lights. I honked like an idiot for a moment. Suddenly, the car reappeared at the next bend, idling at the curb as if waiting for me to notice something specific. I was approaching a moment of raw honesty with myself. This wasn't random. No ordinary prankster could orchestrate something this precise. Then they came to the door. It was a Tuesday, with rain falling like the world was being thoroughly rinsed. Gus wagged his tail but remained silent when the knock came. The digital clock on my microwave flickered awake at 2:13 a.m. right as the knocking started. 3 precise, measured raps on the front step. When I opened the door, 2 men stood in the darkness, their black umbrellas folded like swords, long black coats draped over well-tailored suits. They were nothing like typical late-night visitors. Clean shoes, simple faces that were neither young nor old, with neutral expressions that made their eyes seem just a bit too intent. "Good evening," said the taller one, sounding like a radio announcer without warmth. "We are here to speak about your footage." My heart seized. I hadn't told anyone I'd filmed anything. The private proof sat in my top drawer, and suddenly I felt sick. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The shorter man spoke slowly. "We are with the office. We need to review the original file." I started to ask how they knew, then caught myself. They spread their hands, arms up, a gesture that seemed almost conciliatory. "We're not here to make trouble," the tall one said. I recognized the absurdity of negotiating with strangers on my porch at this hour, but a stubborn part of me resisted being pushed around. The SD card was right there in my drawer. I could hand it over and possibly end whatever was happening, or I could hold on to it, keep measuring, questioning. "I don't want anyone rifling through my stuff," I said. "If you're law enforcement, show a badge." They exchanged a knowing look, the kind shared when something unspoken passes between them. "We are not law enforcement in the familiar sense," the tall one stated as casually as reporting the weather. The shorter man asked about auditory disturbances. "No," I replied slowly, my throat tight. Simultaneously they smiled, a tiny, synchronized lift that felt practiced. "Thank you for your cooperation," the tall one said. The shorter man nodded, tilting his head as if checking something off a list. Then they turned and walked away, stepping off the porch into the rain. No car waited. They simply disappeared into the dark, drizzling night, vanishing like people falling behind heavy curtains. The nights rearranged themselves around that precise minute for a time. I still check the trees when the wind dies down. I still wake up some nights and sit with my phone and watch the time change. I sleep. I go to work. I hike on the ridgeway when the weather is right. My friend Eric called just after midnight. His voice had that nervous edge I'd only heard a few times before. "Dude, what the hell did you send me?" I was half asleep, drifting between dreams and waking. I thought it was my alarm and the phone buzzed on the nightstand. "I didn't send you anything," I said, sitting up. He insisted I'd texted a picture just minutes ago, but my messages app showed nothing. "The photo?" he repeated. He stopped mid-exhale. Once in a while, I pull the clip out and look at the smear of silver and wonder what the people on my porch had seen. They said so little. "We need to review the original file. We're not here to make trouble." And they left a problem where it had been, on one small shelf of my life, private and unsettled. Ben had run the file through filters until it looked cleaner, but it never gave more than the same silver smear to an interested eye. He told me not to post it. Someone identifying themselves as a reporter had called him, asking about his source on outdoor phenomena. He told the man he worked with freelance folks and to go away. After 2 men came and asked for the file, the nights went back to normal. Gus stopped pacing to the window at 2:13. The porch camera never again showed the odd black rectangle. The car never came. I'm not saying I know what they were or what the car was. I don't. I know the clock on my microwave lit up at 23 for a while and then it didn't. I know 2 men in black stood on my porch and asked a polite, strange question. And I know Gus is a lighter sleeper now, the way someone who's been paying attention to small things is lighter. The street was the same rain stretch it had been for years, loud in the moment. That was the last night the car pulled up. I handed the SD card to Ben a few days later and told him the whole thing, abridged and messy. He asked to keep a copy. "Here's the rewritten text with restructured paragraphs." Eric's voice sounded unsettled when he first mentioned the photo. Something about a glowing shape hanging over the trees at the edge of my neighborhood. I denied sending anything, but he insisted it came from my number. No sent photos, no recent texts. My last message to him was just a meme about our fantasy league from 2 days ago. "Describe what you're looking at right now," he said suddenly. My bedroom dark with closed curtains. My phone was in my hand. When I swiped through my gallery, nothing new appeared. The last picture was from the previous weekend. Eric exhaled sharply and said he'd send the image back to me. The incoming photo made my stomach tighten. It looked like the woods at the edge of my street, pine and bare oak silhouettes, power lines sloping overhead, and just above the trees, a pale, glowing shape, not bright like a spotlight, but hazy and diffuse like a jellyfish lit from within. The glow seemed to blend with the night, creating an indistinct boundary. I'd never seen anything like it. "Where did you get this?" I whispered. "From you," Eric responded. "It literally says it's from you." Neither of us spoke for a moment. He suggested my phone might have been hacked, but his words lacked conviction. I slid off the bed and crossed to the window, peeking through the thin bar of streetlight leaking through the curtains. The street was empty, the trees at the block's end, dark and still. When I asked Eric to send a screenshot of his messages, he complied. The timestamp matched the moment of his call, showing my name at the top and the mysterious photo. "I'm coming over," he said abruptly. I protested, but he was resolute. The line went dead. I remained at the window, watching the street. No cars were visible. My eyes kept returning to the strange photograph, its unsettling glow lingering in my mind. The park entrance seemed familiar, a slightly uphill angle I recognized from the sidewalk at the end of the block. My phone's camera app revealed minimal details. The photo was taken at 12:03 a.m. with no GPS coordinates or device information. Eric texted at 12:20 a.m. saying he was outside. I threw on a hoodie and went downstairs. Standing by his running car, he looked unsettled. "You didn't send this?" I confirmed I hadn't. He turned his phone toward me, showing the photo that glowed faintly on the screen. Power lines were visible at the park entrance. "I know where this is." "Let's go look," he said. We walked down the street together. A dry cold seeped through my clothes, making me shiver. Our footsteps rang out unusually loud in the hollow air. At the park entrance, everything appeared normal. The wooden sign, gravel path, and trees stood black against the sky. "No glow," Eric muttered quietly. I kept watching the tree line, expecting something to change. Nothing did. "You still have the photo?" I asked. He nodded, holding up his phone. "It looks like it's right here over those trees," he pointed. "Just darkness," I replied. We stood there for a long time. Eventually, Eric suggested, "Maybe someone spoofed your number, some kind of prank." I challenged his theory. "Then why does the picture look like it was taken here?" He remained silent. We walked back to my house. He didn't come inside, just got in his car and left. Upstairs, I sat on my bed's edge with the lights off. My phone lay on the nightstand. I checked messages repeatedly, waiting for something new. Nothing appeared. When I opened my gallery later, the same old photos remained. No trace of that glowing shape, but with my eyes closed, I could still see it hanging over the trees, faint and silent, like a lantern underwater. The next morning, Eric's text stunned me. The photo was gone from his phone, and I asked for details, explained the message remained, but the image was blank, as if it never existed. I checked our message thread. His screenshot from the night before was intact, but the image he'd received was now just a grey box with a question mark. I scrolled through my photos again. Still nothing new. What happened that night remains a mystery to both of us. Not stop and look up at the power lines and the trees sometimes when I'm walking past the park entrance after dark. A pale, glowing shape might be waiting where only a camera can catch it. The night was thick with fog, the kind that hangs in the streets like forgotten curtains and makes the world feel smaller. My van's parcel bay was half full, and the scanner still hung on my belt after completing the usual run through waterfront warehouses and flats. Dundee had emptied for the night, getting quiet after 11. You could almost hear the fog swallowing sounds. The radio was the first odd thing. I always kept it tuned low, some background noise to stay alert. For a while, everything was normal. A local station playing a late-night show. But as I turned onto Lockheed Road, it suddenly went to static. This wasn't the familiar fade-out hiss, but a thin, insect-like static that rose and fell like something breathing near the aerial. It flickered for a second, then cut to a mechanical silence. As if someone had pressed mute on the world, the display blinked, showing no station. I turned the dial. Nothing. Then it returned, another thin, static sweep before falling silent again. This wasn't a regular broken connection, but more like a hesitation in the air. I told myself it was just interference from old buildings or the van's aging wiring. Saying it out loud made it feel less like my imagination was playing tricks. That's what I kept telling myself for the first 5 minutes. The fog made everything anonymous. Streetlights blurred into halos that didn't reach the pavement. Terraces on Tay Street had curtains drawn like shy houses. The city's night workers, who usually keep things moving, were mostly gone, which meant fewer sounds to orient yourself by. Even the dogs weren't barking much. A small constant city hum had been reduced to a tick. Then the van itself started acting strange. The engine was warm and steady, but for a heartbeat, the dashboard lights dimmed slightly, as if someone had tightened a hand on the electrics. It was quick, barely a second, and the heater fan kept turning like nothing had happened. I put the van into gear, pulled up, and everything felt ordinary. I was one of those little failures you shrug at, because nothing major came of it. I left the rear doors open to let the fog drift through the back of the van so it wouldn't hold the smell of other people's packages. The fog inside the bay made everything look soft and out of focus. I had a parcel for a first-floor flat. When I climbed the steps, the stairwell lights dimmed as if they were being watched. The woman who answered the door had her hair in a towel and looked as if she'd expected noise and got a silence instead. She said nothing about it. People don't always say what they notice. It's easier to let odd things slide. When I got back to the van, the radio was doing the same thing again. Static, silence, static. I sat inside with the heater on and watched the droplets beat on the window. My scanner beeped and gave me a new code to drop off by the docks. The voice in my ear through the headset from Dave at dispatch was clear at first. Then his words flattened and hissed and then came back as if he'd swallowed them and then spat them out. He asked if I could take an extra parcel, and I said yes without thinking more, just because I didn't want to be the driver who said no. The call dropped. The headset showed no signal. 10 seconds later, it was fine. I drove toward the docks following the familiar turns. The fog seemed to hug the van tighter the closer I got to the river. There was a smell I couldn't place, a faint tang, metallic and a touch sweet, like someone had left a pot of pennies to moulder. It made me think of old hospitals and things people keep in jars. I told myself that was ridiculous. But the smell lingered in the cab. Near the old blighted warehouses, the fog thinned for a second, and I saw a pale light hovering over the rooftops. It was the third odd thing, and the first that felt like a thing rather than a glitch. It wasn't a street light or a lamp. It was a soft white glow about the size of a slow-moving cloud pocket, just level with the terrace roofs. It floated without motion, not bobbing with the wind, just sitting there like a lantern hung in the wrong place. I pulled over because you pull over when you see something that isn't a thing you usually see. Mostly because that gives you a chance to look without being foolish in a heap of traffic. There wasn't any traffic. The pause was brief, but the glow remained, an odd bead over the rows of houses. No sound from where it hung. The fog hung low, and the city seemed muted. No sound, no movement. The roofs below sat dark, windows sealed, with a strange glow that didn't touch the slate tiles. Everything remained still and quiet. Then something unexpected happened. A light shot upward through the fog, so fast it made my stomach flutter. It pierced straight up like an invisible wand rising from the ground, leaving a clear path through the mist before vanishing into the cloud layer in an instant. No sound accompanied this movement, no wind, nothing. Suddenly, the radio cleared. Dave's voice came through the Pruvapose headset, asking about my parking spot. I answered briefly. He mentioned losing my signal for a moment, with my GPS showing me stopped in a place with no connection. My hands trembled, though I told myself it was just nerves. The transition felt oddly smooth. 1 second disrupted, the next perfectly normal. I completed my deliveries, gripping the wheel tightly as the city slowly hummed back to life. A pub door slammed somewhere. A taxi rolled past. I stopped at a late-night van for coffee, where two guys were laughing about a football match. They hadn't seen anything in the fog, or if they had, they weren't talking. People often choose silence during strange moments, preferring to compare notes later. Driving back to base, my dash clock jumped 30 seconds before settling. My nearly dead phone now showed a full battery. Small things felt off-kilter. The delivery scanner showed a missed scan I later found in the van. A route normally taking 15 minutes stretched to 17. These little irregularities were minor on paper, but they left a strange metallic taste. At the depot, I tried discussing it with Kenny, who parks next to me. He just shrugged, saying the fog plays tricks when you're tired, and maybe he was right. Exhaustion can certainly rearrange reality. And I had a conversation about the pale light, and he told me about rumors of drone tests along the coast. His tone carried both a story and a hint of something more. By the time I left the depot, the fog had thinned, transforming into a mist that would dissolve by morning. I drove home with the stereo low, listening to the same cheeky presenter. An old man at the streetlights waved, and I waved back. His expression held that familiar look people get when waiting for someone to return home. Inside, I sat in the kitchen with the kettle steaming, staring at the circle of condensation on the window where the street lamp cast a faint halo. I didn't share everything with my partner. Just the parts that sounded reasonable. A radio with intermittent signals, odd battery readings, a bright light in the fog that suddenly appeared. She made tea and nodded in that way she does when my work takes on an unusual tone. She asked if I was okay, and I assured her I was. The truth lingered in my thoughts, how quickly the light vanished and the preceding silence. The radio's sudden clarity stood out as the most reliable detail amid a night of strange occurrences. Later, I reviewed the dashcam footage. Fog, the van, the street, and in one frame, a pale blur rising. The replay seemed choppy, with the blur appearing and disappearing between frames. Static interrupted the audio before clear speech emerged. Time-stamped discrepancies added to the enigma. Sleep came fitfully that night. I awoke to rain at dawn. Outside, children played, and the city hummed with its usual morning rhythms. Fog remained only in small puddles and a damp scent on washing lines. The next day proceeded normally, bright roads returning holiday travelers, punctual buses. Yet in quiet moments, while filling the kettle during low-grey evenings, I catch myself listening for radio static or subtle underlying sounds. Mostly, silence prevails. Occasionally, out of habit, I glance at the rooftops. The memory sits like an unlabeled object in a drawer, precise enough to feel real, but too elusive to fully grasp. I was approaching the final stretch of the Farmington night flight. Clear skies, a slender moon hanging overhead. Night is a way of making you think about how small everything seems. I was trimmed for 554 SOAR, with autopilot engaged. A half-empty furnace sitting inside the console. Flight radios were quiet, punctuated only by occasional handoffs and a distant cargo truck, crackling on 1215, sounding like it was 3 counties away. This was a routine leg I'd flown countless times before. Out the left window, something moved into the landing light's cone. At first, I mistook it for a star, but it wasn't. It was too close. Positioned about the same angle off the nose as the wingtip, maybe 5 or 6 miles to the left, and seemingly at our exact altitude. No blinking, no navigation lights, no strobes, just a dark, hard edge against the sky. The kind of shape that seems to absorb starlight. Initially, I rationalized it as unexpected traffic, maybe an unlisted crop duster or banner tow. I checked the transponder, toggled to ident and listened for any T-cast warnings. Nothing. The EFIs showed the usual blank space where traffic would display. My transponder was transmitting, and the ADS-B was showing the earlier heard traffic. Equipment appeared functional, yet this object held its position relative to us like it belonged in the same airspace. I called Center, Cessna 7KQH visual traffic. Left 2 o'clock, same altitude, same intentions. The response came back clear and practiced. 7KQH Center. Roger. We show no primary or secondary target in your area. Maintain present heading and altitude. No target. I double-checked the heading, glanced at the GPS track, and looked out the window again. The object had matched my ground track and speed, not perfectly aligned like 2 planes occasionally fly side by side, but keeping pace as if glued to our velocity vector. I disengaged the autopilot and moved the yoke to feel the motion. When I banked left 3 degrees for a better look, the thing did something indescribable. It rolled, not banked or turned, but rolled as if gravity had loosened its grip. It rotated on a sideways axis with a slow, lazy motion unlike any airplane's movement. Then it slid laterally, exactly opposite my bank, moving with water-like fluidity, no acceleration, no plume, no wake. It simply moved, like we were dance partners with a complex, unspoken choreography. I was flying along, everything seeming normal, when something unusual caught my attention. My radio contact with Center remained steady, despite the tension building inside me. The traffic appeared perfectly parallel, moving westward. After a moment of static, the controller responded. I now understand they were scanning their scope for primary returns. Their response was clear. No targets, no interference detected, yet something felt off. I meticulously checked my systems. The headset carried a subtle, precise noise that signals potential issues. I toggled frequencies, checked the squelch, examined the standby, and adjusted the audio panel. Everything functioned normally. PTO heat on, vacuum steady alternated green. The panel clock blinked momentarily before resuming its routine. Ordinary systems performed ordinary tasks, while something extraordinary existed just outside. Grabbing the binoculars from under the glare shield, I noticed they were cold and damp, as if they'd been somewhere unexpectedly chilled. Raising them, I saw a shape unlike any typical aircraft. Geometric, not rounded. Its edges appeared matte, refusing to reflect landing lights. No windows, no tail, no propeller blur were visible. Instead of flickering or shimmering, this object simply existed, matching my position precisely. When I shifted to view it head-on, it responded by banking right. I carefully maintained airspeed, avoiding unnecessary altitude changes and keeping manual control. The object's movement defied conventional logic. It slid away as if tethered to an invisible string, completing a lazy turn and drifting sideways across the horizon. No noise, no thermal wake accompanied its motion, reminiscent of smoke dispersing in reverse. I contacted approach on the guard channel, reporting my tail number and the visual traffic at my 1 o'clock position matching my altitude and gliding parallel. Their response was unequivocal. No targets detected in the Ome sector, only my transponder and known traffic showing on their screens. The only question that truly mattered remained unanswered. My watch was 5 minutes fast and then corrected itself. The thermos slid on the console for no reason when I eased back to neutral trim. My phone, which I had set to record when this started, had one file that corrupted into a single unopenable blob and a second file that on playback showed 3 frames of a dark smear and then a blackness my phone described as unsupported. Pilots estimate poorly at night. Approximately 2 to 3 miles left, same altitude. I was 2 minutes into watching it go from being a curious puzzle to not being here at all. At some point, the silhouette narrowed and brightened like a lens-bending light. I thought it might ignite, strobe or exhaust, some simple physical reveal. Instead, it tightened into a point, and then no phase change, no spray, nothing that you could point to as a mechanism. It simply winked out. One moment there was that indigo cut against the lower sky, the next it was gone. No transit across the stars, no streak. The place where it had been was empty, like someone had lifted a bird cage. After that, all the small things unsettled in the cockpit. I told the controller I had recording and they'd mark it in the strip for the engineers, but they didn't ask for the file. They asked if I wanted to divert. I did not. There was nothing to divert to that made sense. We continued into Farmington like a ship resuming course after a passing insignificant fog. My hands hovered a little above the yoke on the approach, as if not touching it would be safer. The wind held steady, the runway came up, and the landing was exactly the kind of wash of brightness these instruments train you for. On the ground, I taxied in slow and left the lights on because the cabin still had that odd electric cooling I couldn't explain. I filled out the paperwork in the FBO between customers and tried to get someone to look at the files. Maintenance looked at my transponder traces and the ATC printout and my GPS log. They found nothing out of order, except one tiny anomaly in the GPS track where the ground speed showed a half-second blip. The controller sent me the radar tape. I was clean where we'd been. This sort of thing happens sometimes at night. One of them said like that, explained anything. I didn't expect an answer. I didn't think there'd be a report. I flew. Can you physically see anything on radar that corresponds to what I'm looking at right now? If we could, the controller said, we would. Then we have nothing. Say position and distance. I drove home that night and filed my incident notes, giving my wife a condensed version. I didn't want to burden her with something that might sound like I was losing my grip. There was this empty patch of sky that kept replaying in my mind. People always try to categorize experiences like mine. Weather balloon, experimental drone, optical illusion, none of these explanations fit what I witnessed. Something fundamentally changed in me. Now I double-check everything. The transponder, the squitter, frequency, wing flex, even the thermos under the glare shield. I still fly at night. It's my job, and I've been doing it for years. But when I'm heading to Farmington, and something dark occupies a star's usual spot, I report it a bit earlier. The controller always responds that nothing is showing. They always do. My name's Dave Hollis, born and raised in this part of Ohio. I worked nights at a local gas station, so foggy drives weren't new to me. This particular night was different. I was driving home late, just outside Ashtabula, when the fog rolled in. Thick, low-hanging mist swallowed the road completely. One moment I was cruising along Route 20 near Lake Erie. The next, the world turned grey and dense, like someone had dropped a heavy blanket over the entire area. About 5 miles past Geneva, heading west toward home, I spotted headlights approaching through the mist. Seemed normal at first, except these lights never actually passed me. They appeared to float in the fog, getting closer but never moving beyond my position. No engine sound, no tire noise, just two steady beams cutting through the grayness. I slowed down, watching carefully. The lights stayed directly in front of me, maybe 100 yards away, moving as if they wanted to meet me. Pulling onto the gravel shoulder, I hoped to give the other driver space to pass, but the lights simply stopped, suspended in the fog. Silence enveloped me, interrupted only by my idling engine. Suddenly, a soft hazy glow appeared about 50 yards ahead. Blue and white, it wasn't like any car light or street lamp. It just existed, floating 3 or 4 feet above the ground. I squinted, straining to understand what I was seeing, but the fog obscured any clear view. I was driving through thick fog near Ashtabula late at night when something strange happened. A glow suddenly shot straight up like someone had flipped a switch, rising smoothly and quickly into the sky before vanishing into the clouds above. The moment it lifted, everything went completely silent. All the usual background sounds disappeared. No crickets, no distant highway traffic, not even the hum of my own truck's engine. It was as if the entire world had paused for a moment. I sat frozen, totally still. I switched off the truck, rolled down the window and listened. Nothing. Not a single sound broke the silence. No birds, no breeze, not even the typical rustling of insects in the weeds. When I finally turned the truck back on, the mysterious headlights were gone. The fog had thinned slightly, and gradually the normal nighttime sounds began to return. I continued driving, my eyes constantly scanning the shadows and movements in the woods alongside the road. Though the rest of the journey was uneventful, I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling of being watched, as if something had silently slipped past me in that dense fog. Back home, I meticulously checked the locks and sat staring out the window at the dark road. I still can't explain what that light was or what it was doing out there, but I know I wasn't imagining the profound silence that followed. If you ever find yourself driving through thick fog near Ashtabula late at night, keep a close eye on those headlights. No, I apologize, but the provided text appears to be incomplete or corrupted. Could you please provide the full original text that you would like me to rewrite? Without the complete original text, I cannot accurately rewrite the script while preserving its original meaning.